Chapter 148. By the time the giants finished their dinner, the sky had already darkened. Half of the prey had been eaten, and there was a large pile of bones here. A few giants got up and threw the bones up the small mountain of bones. Although I already understood the origin of the bone mountain, I didn't know why the giants piled up the bones into a mountain. From the bone powder at the foot of the bone mountain, I could guess that the earliest bone mountain was thousands of years old. In other words, the giants had lived here for generations and never migrated. That was why the bones were piled up. Just now, all the giants were kowtowing to the totems around the bone mountain. I could guess why they never migrated. It could be said that they were very different from the ancient giants I had met before. I had never seen a female ancient giant before. Today, I saw it with my own eyes. Interestingly, the ancient giants were indeed divided into males and females. However, female ancient giants were very rare. People often wondered if the ancient giants had females and how they reproduced. More interestingly, the female ancient giants with big shoulders and round waists seemed to be stronger and more ferocious than the male ancient giants. Moreover, they were often the leaders of the ancient giant group. This made people wonder if the ancient giants were a matriarchal society, although there was no evidence to show the social structure of the ancient giants. The origin of the ancient giants was still an unsolved mystery. Like other humanoid races, the ancient giants also had a certain level of intelligence and civilization. They would use animal skins to sew simple clothes and decorate them with animal bones. They would build huge bonfires to warm themselves and mark their territory. Although they were powerful, the ancient giants rarely fought with their bare hands. They would usually use bones, stones, and wood to make simple sticks or stone axes as weapons. The ancient giants would occasionally hunt, but their main source of food came from their unique domestic animals, mammoths. Mammoths provided the ancient giants with fur, meat, milk, ivory, and bones. Therefore, the ancient giants valued their mammoths very much and treated them as their own property. Hurting a mammoth with an owner was almost as serious as hurting its owner. According to some observations, the ancient giants did have a very special affinity and affection for mammoths. The ancient giants could also speak, but it sounded like vague and low snoring. Only the ancient giants could understand the meaning of this language. This was the ancient giant language. Some people learned this language through special methods and found that it could help to eliminate the hostility of the ancient giants. After training, the ancient giant could also speak a few simple sentences in Dwarven and German. The ancient giants did not have words, but they seemed to like to use some spiral patterns to mark the stones around their territory or the tusks of their tamed mammoths. These patterns were thought to be simple to attract mates or mark their territory. The ancient giants usually lived in small groups of a few ancient giants. It was said that in ancient times, there were dozens or even hundreds of ancient giants that formed a large tribe. They were led by the most powerful ancient giant king who had absolute authority. However, most of these tribes were destroyed in the war between the ancient giants and the German Empire. Nowadays, they were almost nowhere to be seen. Sometimes, the ancient giants of a region would gather in a specific place to communicate, exchange items, or mate. This kind of place seemed to have some kind of religious nature, although no religion of the ancient giants had been found so far. It was worth mentioning that the ancient giants were one of the few creatures that had special feelings for death other than the intelligent races. According to some observations, the ancient giants of a region were always willing to end their lives in a specific place. If they died in an accident, their companions would try to bring their bodies there to be buried. The reason for the formation of this ancient giant mound was still unknown. Most of the time, the ancient giants maintained a relatively peaceful state with other intelligent races. The only large-scale conflict occurred when they broke with the dwarves. At that time, they often fought with the ancient giant tribe. Although they were destructive, the ancient giants were not aggressive. As long as their territory and the mammoths they tamed were not threatened, they were relatively peaceful. Of course, in the Dwarf Kingdom, there were still incidents of ancient giants breaking into farms or attacking caravans from time to time. Therefore, The dwarves also retaliated against the ancient giants by ganging up on the lone ancient giant. However, there was a huge difference between the ancient giants and the ordinary ancient giants on the Althalia ice peak. In fact, these ancient giants were a type of frost ancient giant. These ancient giants were extremely rare, and compared to ordinary ancient giants, their appearance was even more peculiar. They had horns for eyes, 3 fingers, and long hair that was much thicker than the ancient giants. Moreover, they seem to be much stronger than ordinary primordial giants, and they can use the power of frost. However, we know nothing about their origins. They seem to worship totems, and they seem to like killing. They are very ferocious, and they don't seem to be very intelligent. Most importantly, they are very smelly. When talking about the ancient giants, it was necessary to talk about the mammoths, which were closely related to the ancient giants. These giant beasts that lived in the dwarf kingdom all had 2 pairs of long teeth. These mammoths that lived in the dwarf kingdom were huge in size and had brown hair. As long as they were not provoked, mammoths were relatively docile creatures. Although they looked fierce, they would not actively attack other creatures. Only the tall ancient giants had successfully tamed them. Mammoths were the most important livestock of the ancient giants. They provided the ancient giants with meat, milk, skin, teeth, and bones as decorations. Similarly, mammoths were also the most important property of the ancient giants. Attacking a mammoth raised by a giant without permission would anger its owner. Although mammoths had great war potential, there were not many records of them being used in war. The only record now was that when the Dwarf Kingdom resisted the invasion of Holy Emperor Barassa, there were records of ancient giants and mammoths joining the war. Our group was well hidden, and Uther and I had used our domain-level power to hide our auras. These stupid frost ancient giants had not discovered us yet. They were kowtowing to the terrifying skull totem. Their movements were very big, and we were even a little nervous. After all, there were 11 frost ancient giants. At this time, Uther and I discovered at almost the same time that there seemed to be a huge sinkhole in the place where the ancient giants came from. However, it was very far away and could not be seen with the naked eye. We perceived it through our domain-level power. What was that place? Chapter 149. Just like that, we waited for the frost primordial giants to finish everything. We planned to take advantage of the night to bypass the frost primordial giants' territory and go directly to the sinkhole to investigate. After the 11 frost primordial giants had eaten their fill, they wiped the blood and flesh from their mouths and communicated with each other in a language that seemed to come from their throats. Then, they got up and began to walk back in the direction they came from. Their footsteps were so big that the ground around them trembled. Finally, after they left, our tense nerves relaxed a little. At that moment, the stench around us made us feel nauseous. We hadn't eaten for a long time. We quietly thanked Chief Linda of the Snow Region Harrymen. With Queen Olivia's translation, we asked Chief Linda to return to his Frost Edge tribe. We would explore the rest of the way slowly. Chief Linda of the Snow Region Harrymen did not say anything. He was very happy to be able to help us. Since that was the case, he went back to his tribe alone. The rest was up to us. We decided to follow the frost primordial giant's footprints and carefully head to the sinkhole. I had a premonition that there was something at the bottom of the sinkhole. In fact, these frost primordial giants were kneeling in the direction of the sinkhole. Could they be worshipping the sinkhole? Although I had a hunch, I couldn't say anything. We could only take one step at a time. At that moment, we saw that in the distance, the frost primordial giants had returned. It turned out that the frost primordial giants lived some distance from here. That was the only way to get to the sinkhole. The frost primordial giants lived in a large area. They were lying on the ground in a disorderly manner. There were 2 sleeping mammoths and a small mammoth next to them. Loud snoring. It seemed that the frost primordial giants had fallen asleep. Our group carefully moved forward. However, if we wanted to get to the sinkhole, we had to pass through the frost primordial giants' territory. There were a few bonfires burning here, providing us with some light. Although I was already a domain tier, I felt very uneasy facing so many frost primordial giants at the same time. especially when I had to protect the others. The place was very messy. It was really in line with the frost primordial giant style. We stepped over the sleeping frost primordial giants. We walked all the way to the sinkhole. Uther used his perception to lead the others in front. Avina and I stayed behind in case the ancient frost giants suddenly woke up. Fortunately, we were careful enough to not alarm these primordial frost giants. However, who would have thought that even though we didn't alarm those frost ancient giants, an enormous beast howl suddenly sounded from the heavenly pit. His voice was so loud that it reverberated through the area. His wails caused the ancient frost giants to instantly sit up and look in the direction of the sinkhole. In an instant, the expressions on the faces of these frost primordial giants seemed to reflect the fear in their hearts. But when they saw us humans and dwarves, these horned primordial frost giants instantly became incomparably tyrannical. All of them stood up and picked up their weapons, clubs, and rocks. Then they attacked us crazily. He was truly speechless. Who would have expected such a thing to happen at this time? It wouldn't have mattered if it had happened earlier or later, but it just had to happen at this time. But what exactly was in that sinkhole? What was it that was wailing? For a moment, the earth shook and the mountains shook. Althalia's icy peak was very big, and this sinkhole was located near the peak. Under Uther's lead, the dwarves madly ran toward the sinkhole. Avina and I also entered battle mode and prepared to deal with the ancient frost giants that had already pounced on us. These ancient frost giants bared their fangs and brandished their claws. Some of them even threw huge rocks at us. Those huge rocks still had ice on them. There was no other way. I could only use my strongest domain to suppress them. I released my domain-level aura and covered those frost primordial giants. For a moment, these ancient frost giants were intimidated. They actually stopped and even looked a little scared. However, after a short while, these ancient frost giants bared their fangs and attacked me and Avina with ferocious expressions. Avina and I fought as we retreated. Soon, we met other people who were around that sinkhole. Soon, the ancient frost giants caught up with us. When they saw us standing at the edge of the sinkhole, they all knelt down, their faces filled with fear. They began to speak in the ancient Jotun language. Then, like a wisp of smoke, they turned around and ran back in the direction they had come from. They said that this is the abyss of despair. Anyone who goes down will never return. They will only be swallowed by the endless abyss, said Queen Olivia. She understood some of the Jotun language. We looked at the sinkhole from the side. This sinkhole was really huge. I really admired the uncanny workmanship of the God of creation. This kind of miracle wasn't something that could be seen every day. As we stood at the edge of this huge sinkhole, it felt like some kind of power was trying to suck us in. The wind that blew from the sinkhole carried a trace of coldness. This was the abyss of despair that the ancient frost giants had mentioned. It seemed likely that the ancient corpse emperor's lair was inside. However, was there really only the ancient corpse emperor's lair here? Why hadn't we seen a single corpse ghost since we had set foot on Althalia's icy peak? I didn't believe that I had killed all the corpse ghosts last time. Also, how did the corpse ghosts go down each time? Did they climb out of the ground and come back to the icy peak? Although the corpse ghosts didn't get tired, this was too torturous. Since the ancient frost giants had retreated, we weren't in a hurry to go down the sinkhole. This sinkhole was surrounded by uneven cliffs. It was so deep that we couldn't see the bottom. It was pitch black. We decided to rest here and eat something. After all, it had been a long time since we had rested. I thought that whatever was underground had made the ancient frost giants run away. It seemed that this thing was even more terrifying than them. There's a good saying, when you stare into the abyss stares back at you. I wanted to ask for everyone's opinion. I wanted to see if there was anyone who didn't want to go down. They could stay here and help us. Fred used the flint he had brought with him to light a torch. Then he threw the torch into the sinkhole. The torch was instantly extinguished. After a long time, there was no response. Then we heard a mournful howl from the sinkhole. That sound directly penetrated our bodies and attacked our souls. Chapter 150. Now, if anyone doesn't want to go down, you can stay here and wait for us to come up, or you can go back directly. After all, I don't know what's down there. It may be a danger that I can't fight against. I don't know if I can protect you when the time comes. I said to Queen Olivia, Fred, and the remaining elite dwarven warriors. Lord Lyric, we are willing to go with you. No matter what, we will die without regrets. We will not cause you any trouble. An elite dwarven warrior took the lead and said, and the others followed. Yes, you can rest assured. This is our choice. Don't think about leaving us behind. Queen Olivia also said with a smile. She had already replaced the dead elite dwarven warrior's one-handed battle axe and round shield. After all, she still needed a melee weapon. Who cares? We dwarves aren't cowards. I'll smash his head open with my axe and see how different he is from us, Fred said straightforwardly, not minding it at all. Don't worry, my lord. We will not hold you back. The dwarves said one after another. Well, since no one has any objections, let's go down together. I saw that no one had any objections, so I decided to study how to go down this abyss. Another sorrowful beast howl resounded. We knew that there must be some terrifying monster in this abyss. In the end, we decided that I would become a complete dragon. I could bring 5 to 6 dwarves with me, and I could carry a few dwarves on my back at the same time. Awena would summon the elf dragon Weep. That way, she, Queen Olivia, and the remaining dwarves could be brought along. As for the northern ascetic Uther, he could easily go down the abyss by himself. Uther took the initiative to say that he wanted to go down first to investigate. If something went wrong, he could at least escape quickly. In this way, we would not be wiped out if we went down immediately. We all felt that it was very reasonable, and we were very grateful that Uther would go first to investigate. At the same time, I believed in his strength. In an emergency, it should not be a problem for him to escape. In this way, Uther went down first. His movements were extremely light and swift, like a meteor rushing into the abyss. After a long time, everyone was on tenterhooks, very worried about Uther's situation. Just then, a voice came from below. I am fine. Come down. It was Uther's voice. We all cheered. I then transformed into a complete dragon transformation. Although these dwarves knew that it was me, they were still trembling in fear. My dragon claws grabbed many dwarves, and Fred and another dwarf rode on my back. On the other side, Avina also summoned the elf Ronwhip. The elf Ronwhip was summoned from the magic space and even stretched. Immediately, Avina and Queen Olivia rode on Ronwhip's back. Elven Ronwhip also grabbed the remaining dwarves. They were ready. Just like that, the two of us set off towards the bottom of the abyss. Fortunately, the entrance of this sinkhole was very big. The elf Ronwhip that Avina and I summoned could actually enter the abyss at the same time. We flew for a while in the dark. Fortunately, Elven Dragon Wepu and I still had night vision. Otherwise, if we were to crash into something, the dwarves would be in big trouble. At this time, I saw Uther. He was on a large ice surface. The ice surface was big enough for Elven Ronwhip and I to land safely. The dwarves also landed one after another. To be honest, these dwarves were suffering. Not to mention that they had never ridden on a dragon before, and it was very likely that they would get dizzy. Just the fact that they were being dragged around for so long was very tiring. Each of the seemingly intrepid and stubborn elite dwarven warriors endured the discomfort. They wanted to vomit, but were too embarrassed to do so. Each of them looked like they were drunk. This scene was somewhat funny. Fred's situation was better, because he was riding on my back. However, he felt that it would be better if he never rode on a dragon a second time. Just like that, we once again gathered at the bottom of the abyss. Although it was pitch black at this time, we quickly each held a torch. Suddenly, we had a certain understanding of the surrounding situation. It turned out that the bottom of the abyss was actually like this. We were on a large ice surface in the abyss. This ice surface wasn't the bottom of the abyss. There was a fault where we could see the cliff that led to the bottom. We decided to explore this place first. Sure enough, we made a new discovery. At the end of the ice surface, near the edge of the abyss, we found a large cave entrance. There was no other way. We could only go in and take a look. I turned into my human form. Avina also called back Elven Ronwhip. We followed the cave entrance. The inside of the cave was winding and rugged. I was responsible for exploring the path in front, and Uther was responsible for covering the rear. Our group slowly groped their way into the depths of the cave. At this time, the sorrowful howl from before suddenly resounded again. But this time, it was even more miserable and louder. We could hear it very clearly. The howl was actually coming from this cave. For a moment, all of our nerves entered a state of tension. We didn't know what we were about to face. We had to be ready to fight at any time. The deeper we went into the cave, the more we felt a biting cold. I was fine, but the others were shivering from the cold. In the end, what was it? I seemed to have a bad premonition. No matter what, I must protect Divina. As for the dwarves, I only said that I would do my best to help them, but I wouldn't risk my life to help. Everyone was silently moving forward. Everyone tried not to make any noise, so as not to disturb something we didn't know about. Suddenly, a dazzling white light shone into each of our eyes. We couldn't help but be shocked. But after a moment, we saw an unforgettable scene. It turned out that we had reached the end of the cave. It suddenly became open. The end of the cave was completely covered with thick ice. No wonder it was so cold. This ice reflected all the light. From here, we could see everything clearly. What kind of monster was that? This monster had two huge white wolf heads with their mouths wide open. Its huge body was no less than a mammoth, and its fur was snow white. The most important thing was that its body was firmly bound by 8 arm-thick chains that came from who knows where. The monster was bound by the black chains made of an unknown material. It didn't look good, as if it was in pain. These arm-thick chains sometimes emitted red light. At this time, the monster's face was twisted in pain, and it kept howling. Chapter 151. We saw that the two-headed giant white wolf's long nose, mouth, and eyes were all twisted together. Even we felt pain when we saw the pained expression on his face. He was still twisting his body from time to time. He was frantically trying to break free from the chains. However, the more he tried to break free, the brighter the red light of the chains, and the more pain he was in. The giant monster saw us, but he couldn't do anything. He couldn't do anything to us. He couldn't even do anything to the chains. He was furious and tried to break free even more frantically. However, it was all in vain. Terrifying wolf howls and sorrowful cries continuously reverberated in this spacious and cold cave. No, we couldn't stay here for too long. We would freeze to death. We couldn't care less about who had chained this giant beast here to be tortured. If we didn't leave this place soon, he would really die from the cold. But we're going to go back the way we came. Where would we go after we returned? For a moment, we felt very lost. Then, I used my domain power to realize that the cave wasn't sealed. There was actually a path. However, we had to carefully pass through the giant white wolf with 2 heads. Seeing that he was chained up, we felt that he should be fine. If we avoided him quickly, we could still reach the entrance of the cave. Just like that, we decided. We formed a line and quickly avoided the monster to reach the cave. I was in charge of taking the lead. I carefully passed through the cave. The giant white wolf with 2 heads saw that I was trying to pass through in front of him. He was furious and wanted to use his giant white wolf claws to kill me. However, the white wolf paw stopped in front of me. He was chained up and couldn't reach me. What followed was his painful howls. Seeing this, everyone imitated me and quickly passed through the cave. Most of us came to the next cave. The 2-headed wolf panicked, but he couldn't do anything about it. Suddenly, he spat out a breath of ice at a pitiful elite dwarf warrior who wanted to pass through. That stubborn and pitiful dwarf warrior was instantly frozen into a block of ice. Just a second ago, he was still rejoicing that he could pass through and reach the cave. Seeing this, we immediately ran deeper into the cave. We didn't expect that guy to know how to use ice breath. Luckily, he didn't use it at the beginning. Behind him were the screams of the 2 dwarves who didn't come over and the miserable howls of the 2-headed wolf. We don't know who locked the monster up, but we're glad that it was locked up. I began to feel that this abyss wasn't as simple as we had thought. However, I had a feeling that something was calling me from the bottom of the abyss. I had a feeling that it wasn't just the ancient corpse emperor. Once again, we set foot on the path forward. We didn't even have the time to grieve for the fallen elite dwarven warriors. Fortunately, it wasn't that cold anymore. It seemed that the two-headed wolf was really terrifying, causing the surrounding temperature to drop quite a bit. Suddenly, our feet slipped, and we rolled down the sloping tunnel. Then, our group fell into a place that was deeper in the river. Fortunately, no one was injured. It was said to be a riverbank because in front of us was a river of shining silver metal. Is this mithril? An elite dwarf warrior said in horror. Mithril was an extremely precious alchemy material that could only be mined in very few places. The dwarves had never heard of mithril that could form a river like this. Queen Olivia and Fred were also shocked. Even Uther and Avina were shocked. What's going on? Suddenly, the glowing silver metal river shot out a beam of cold light. That beam of silver light merged into a ball of silver liquid in the distance. Then, the ball of silver liquid transformed into a humanoid shape. Naturally, a set of silver armor formed on the surface of his body. Is this a mithril warrior? Fred was shocked. After all, Fred was born in a noble dwarf family. He had read about this almost extinct creature in some ancient books. The humanoid mithril warrior glanced at us coldly. He snorted and said, "I didn't expect you to be able to come here from the two-headed wolf." The mithril warrior spoke in the Derman language. Our jaws dropped. The kingdom of dwarves, the ice peak of Althalia, a mysterious mithril warrior who spoke in the Derman language. We didn't know how to react. This guy was a mithril warrior. Was his body made of mithril? I looked at the flowing silver liquid carefully. The body of a mithril warrior is actually made of mithril. It should be considered a high-quality material among mithril. Mithril is very malleable. It allows a mithril warrior to easily change into various forms. It is also very inclusive. Ordinary attacks can't hurt him at all, Fred said to us. Lindley and the others' faces changed. They also understood that nothing was absolute. This guy must have his own weakness. I was not sure. Just based on his liquid body, I didn't have full confidence. Don't let the mithril warrior wrap you up. Once you're wrapped up, you'll be swallowed by this guy. Of course, it's best not to touch them, Fred said. As he spoke, he no longer had any confidence in himself. It was simply impossible for him to kill this guy without bumping into him. Mithril warriors were very inclusive. They could contain water, earth, metal, and stone. They would all have different effects. At this time, he was wrapped up in air, and his body instantly became much bigger. Go to hell. The mithril warrior waved his arm, and his arm turned into the shape of a blade. It was so fast that even Uther couldn't dodge it. He was directly sent flying. Our group was shocked. This guy was so difficult to deal with, but we didn't have any effective way to kill him. Moreover, he was not like the snow region two-headed wolf. We could barely escape from him. It seemed that there would be a battle today. Either you die, or I die. I had to use all my strength. Otherwise, I might really die here. Even though I was already at the domain level, I was not sure if I could defeat such an unfamiliar and difficult opponent. Plus, this guy seemed to have a higher IQ than ordinary monsters. He could even speak the Derman language. We couldn't go on like this. We had to think of a way to escape or a way to defeat this guy. Suddenly, I seemed to have thought of something. Why don't we give it a try? Maybe it will work. Let's do it. Chapter 152. Do you think you can defeat me with just a few humans and dwarves? That's a fool's dream, the mithril warrior said to us, his body glowing with silver light. At this moment, he had fused with the air and became huge in an instant. He had transformed into the appearance of the two-headed wolf of Snow Domain that we had seen before, but in the form of silver metal. It seemed that the mithril warrior's flexibility were really terrifying. The mithril warrior that had transformed into a two-headed wolf of Snow Domain had a terrifying face and was extremely fierce. He just shook his head and wagged his tail, and the mithril all over his body shot towards us like needles. The density of the needles was comparable to a rainstorm. Countless mithril needles shot towards us. We could only use our own methods to protect ourselves, either defending or dodging. The dwarven warriors who weren't able to react in time to these needle-like mithril needles felt as if they had been shot by bullets. The most frightening thing was that the mithril needles could turn and be controlled by the mithril warrior who had transformed into a two-headed wolf of Snow Domain. They could even merge back with him. As a result, another two elite dwarven warriors fell helplessly. The remaining dwarven warriors used round shields to protect their bodies. These round shields were also forged by the dwarven master armorsmith and were very strong. However, after being hit by the mithril, it was not as simple as we had imagined. The mithril could actually merge with the metal on the round shields and slowly penetrate them, as if they were alive. It was terrifying. The mithril seemed to be able to penetrate these round shields at any time. Fred kept waving his double-edged axe, but he was simply overwhelmed. Uther had always kept the little snow fox with him. This time, he still brought the snow fox with him. His body formed a sky-blue protective light that was visible to the naked eye. The spear in his hand turned into a meteor and stabbed towards the mithril warrior. At the same time, Avina kept shooting frost arrows at the mithril warrior who had transformed into a two-headed wolf of Snow Domain. The frost arrows hit the mithril warrior's body, causing him to feel a burst of pain. There were also some frozen spots on his body. With a roar, Uther turned into a meteor and quickly arrived in front of the mithril warrior. Without any mercy, Uther pierced a big hole in the abdomen of the mithril warrior who had transformed into a two-headed wolf. The mithril warrior couldn't care less about the mithril needles. He was in so much pain that he tried to slap the agile Uther with his huge wolf claws. However, his body seemed to deflate and shrank in an instant. The huge mithril warrior reverted back to its original appearance. It was a silver mithril warrior with a ferocious face, spikes all over its body, and glowing with a bright light. Seeing this, we also gathered around. We want to take advantage of the situation and defeat the mithril warriors here. You people have really pissed me off. I'm a mithril warrior. How could I be defeated by you? I'm serious now. I don't want to play with you anymore. The mithril warrior said to us in fluent German. You really talk a lot of nonsense. I really felt that it was better if this monster didn't know how to speak. If he was so powerful, then prove it to us. I also released my domain level pressure, but the guy didn't seem to be afraid. Maybe he wasn't a living creature at all. This time, Uther and I worked together. The others shouldn't be able to help for the time being. The little snow fox was firmly lying on Uther's left shoulder. She wrinkled her little nose and looked very cute. She didn't affect Uther's performance. Instead, she seemed to be cheering him on. I also decided to use the power of the stars because I just saw that the mithril warrior didn't have any resistance to the power of the stars. It was as I guessed. But what we didn't notice was that the flowing mithril river had stopped flowing at this moment. In the blink of an eye, when Uther and I were about to attack the mithril warrior, the mithril river had transformed into countless mithril warriors that looked exactly like the mithril warrior. There were so many of them that it was impossible to count. If one was so difficult to deal with, wouldn't there be no hope at all? But because the mithril river had turned into mithril warriors, the riverbed that was originally flowing with mithril instantly dried up, revealing the bottom of the river. It turned out that there was a hole in the riverbed at the bottom of the mithril river. It seemed to be the entrance of a passage, but it was full of mithril warriors. What should we do? It seemed that the hole-like entrance of the passage might be our only hope. At this time, I vaguely felt that something was wrong. As soon as I entered the abyss of despair, I saw the escaping snow yaks, the ice crawlers, and the kneeling frost giants. The Snow Domain two-headed wolf in the abyss was locked in the ice cave by someone using strange chains made of unknown materials. Now, the entire mithril river had transformed into countless mithril warriors that were connected to each other and led to the passage and entrance below. They seemed to be guarding something terrible. Even if the ancient corpse emperor was here, it shouldn't be like this. There must be something else. I felt as if something was summoning me. In just a moment, everyone suffered heavy casualties. Another two elite dwarven warriors fell down with wounds all over their bodies. From the beginning of the expedition, there were only a few elite dwarven warriors left now. They were all brave. They died to protect the dignity and honor of the dwarves. I gritted my teeth. I knew that this was a moment of life and death. I remembered the training I received from the first leader, Brigham Martin. No matter what, I had to save everyone from the mithril warriors. This time, Uther and I stood on the left and right. The little snow fox on Uther's shoulder also seemed to be ready for battle. You can't run away. Today, you will die here. In an instant, the countless mithril warriors said this sentence in unison. I infused the power of the stars into the sword of retribution. The blade emitted a light blue light. Today, I would like to see whether the mithril warriors or my power of the stars are stronger. On Uther's side, his spear of stars shone with a cold light. His face was unusually determined. It was the kind of expression that could only be seen after a long period of hard training. As for the others, Fred, Owena, Queen Olivia, and the few remaining elite dwarven warriors, they formed a circle, protecting each other's backs as they faced off against the mithril warriors that were coming from all directions. Chapter 153. Just like that, we faced countless mithril warriors. Uther and I used the power of the stars at the same time. A spear and a sword attacked the mithril warriors guarding the entrance of the tunnel. I leaped into the air and slashed at the mithril warriors with my sword of retribution. Similarly, Uther also attacked the mithril warriors. For a moment, the bodies of the mithril warriors that were touched by the power of the stars were crushed like breadcrumbs. As expected, the mithril warriors were no match for us when the two of us joined forces. They could only rely on numbers to win. Seeing that the mithril warriors guarding the entrance of the tunnel under the riverbed had been wiped out by Uther and I, a gap appeared. Owena, quickly cover the others and run towards the entrance of the tunnel. I couldn't care too much. I could only let everyone seize the opportunity to escape from here. After all, I didn't know if the mithril warriors had any other tricks up their sleeves. Moreover, Uther and I were overwhelmed by their numbers. Oof. Want to run? It won't be that easy, the mithril warriors said in unison in the Delman language. Their voices were like countless echoes, echoing in the empty cave. It was very annoying. This guy was difficult to deal with and extremely annoying. In an instant, the countless mithril warriors poured into the entrance of the tunnel, not giving us any chance to escape. Owena and the others rushed over, but found that the entrance of the tunnel was firmly guarded by these hateful mithril warriors again. This time, before we could do anything, the mithril warriors took the initiative to attack us. Their transformed right arms were abnormally thick, and at the same time, they turned into spikes like spears. Countless mithril warriors rushed towards us. I thought to myself that this was bad. For a moment, I forgot that this guy's IQ was quite high. There was no other way. We could only brace ourselves. Kill them all. Let's fight, I shouted. Then I cast a cross arrow rain. I drew a cross in the air with my sword and swung it casually. Countless cross star power shot towards the mithril warriors like a rain of arrows. For a moment, the mithril warriors were smashed into pieces and scattered on the ground. It was the same for Uther. He was like a flash of lightning as he quickly killed the mithril warriors. The mithril warriors were scared of us, and the others tried their best to kill some mithril warriors as well. At that moment, we discovered that the mithril warriors that were killed didn't die. Instead, they were absorbed by one of the mithril warriors. Gradually, the mithril warrior absorbed all the mithril warriors and turned into a mithril giant. This time, it was a solid mithril giant. Its power was many times stronger than before. You are more powerful than I thought, but you don't have a chance. Prepare to die. The shocked mithril giant's voice made the cave tremble. This was a mithril giant formed by fusing an entire mithril river. It was not something that the mithril warriors from before could compare with. It was not a good idea to continue fighting like this. This mithril giant did not seem to be damaged at all. It was really unkillable. From the way we see it, we can only create an opportunity to escape through the tunnel entrance. We had no advantage at all. Uther and I decided to attract the mithril giant's attention so that he would leave the tunnel entrance. The others would immediately take the opportunity to escape. But this guy seemed to have thought of what we thought of. He was guarding the tunnel entrance, not leaving us any chance. We couldn't waste time with him. I had to use my trump card. My body rushed towards the mithril giant. He stretched out his huge mithril hand and grabbed me. I was caught and couldn't move. The mithril giant was still smiling proudly. He was trying to crush my body. However, this was exactly my plan. The others were still worried about me, but I felt that this should be the most effective way to win or lose. Haha. The first one, annoying human. Go to hell. The mithril giant laughed, but then his smile became distorted. Because this time, I used the mithril giant as a container. I injected a large amount of star power and dragon soul power into it. This mithril had very good magic properties. In an instant, my magic power was injected into the mithril giant's body. I then detonated it with my mind. With a huge explosion, the mithril giant was directly blown into countless mithril fragments, scattering all over the cave. Quick! I immediately told everyone to seize this opportunity. Our group, taking advantage of the mithril giant's disappearance, rushed to the tunnel entrance. As soon as we entered the tunnel entrance, we slid down the smooth tunnel. After a long time, in the cave, the scattered mithril gradually merged back into the riverbed, forming a glowing silver mithril river. Not bad, but if you leave here, you still won't be able to survive. What comes after will only be more terrible. A mithril warrior appeared and said to himself. He shook his head and merged back into the mithril river. As for our group, we finally landed in an underground tunnel after following the downward sloping and slippery tunnel. This place was very different from the surface. There was a huge stone door here. The stone door was very smooth, but there were many strange carvings on the surrounding stone pillars. Facing this stone door, we didn't know what to do for a while. We also didn't know how to enter. At this moment, the stone door opened by itself. Everyone looked at each other, not knowing what to do. To enter or not to enter. We hesitated for a moment. In the end, I decided to go in. No matter what kind of mountain of swords or sea of fire it was, I had to go in. Fortunately, there were no traps here. But even if there were, we weren't afraid. After all, Uther and I were domain realm experts. Ordinary traps couldn't do anything to us. As soon as we entered the stone door, there was a huge stone hall inside. I didn't know what architectural style it was. There were candlesticks in the stone hall, so we could see clearly. What was that? A huge black mirror with a simple frame, smooth and transparent. That mirror was different from a normal mirror. Based on the sound alone, I dare say that there isn't a mirror as big as this in the entire Hadrado continent. As for the material, we couldn't even tell what the material of the mirror was. Most importantly, it couldn't reflect our faces. Chapter 154. When the few of us arrived in front of the huge magic mirror that looked like it was made of ice, we saw images that we had never seen before reflected in the mirror. It turned out that the huge magic mirror was filled with shadows. At that moment, we saw that the shadows in the magic mirror were performing a grand ceremony of worship. Their movements were uniform, and their expressions were solemn. Everyone was so shocked by the grand scene that we forgot to move. We just stood there in a daze. Wother was the first to calm down. He raised his starry sky spear and said righteously, "No matter what tricks he has up his sleeve, we will break them all." All the strange things in this stone house originated from this magic mirror. It could be said that this stone house was essentially a part of this magic mirror. It really was a magic mirror with magical power. But what was it that gave the magic mirror its magical power? Was it a material or something else? Although most of the materials used to build this stone house were marble, they definitely didn't have this magical power. As for the method of construction, I couldn't see anything special about this stone house. I raised my head and fixed my gaze on the magic mirror. If there was something mysterious in this stone house, it would be none other than this mirror. Although I could say that the mysterious magical power came from this magic mirror, I didn't know how it worked. However, I still had some new ideas. Everything seemed to have a new connection. Regardless of what the demonic mirror was, all the information indicated that there was an unknown yet earth-shattering power hidden behind the demonic mirror. This power was so strong that it was terrifying. My heart was shaken, and I was somewhat yearning for it. But at the same time, I shuddered. If this power really existed, wouldn't it completely overturn people's understanding of the world? Perhaps the people from before had inadvertently spied on this power, but why did he place it here? My thoughts were all jumbled up, and many images came one after another, spinning rapidly in my mind. I felt as if the world had turned upside down, and there were many illusions. My heart was in great pain. At this time, Wuther and Fred suddenly shouted, and the stone house was suddenly filled with light and shadows. The sound of fighting was endless. I peeked out of the corner of my eye. After the shadows kowtowed, they seemed to have obtained endless power and broke out of the magic mirror without any effort. These shadows had the same appearance as us, but their actions were pretentious and they exuded a feminine aura. All of a sudden, the stone house was filled with people. We didn't know if there were shadows like us. It was a complete mess. We were completely surrounded. What made us not know whether to laugh or cry was that the enemies surrounding us were actually our own shadows. As long as we don't die, there will be no end to these shadows. In Uther's words, this was called reaping what one sowed. I remembered the first time I met a fake Uther and shouted, "Uther, stop! Stop it! Stop it! As long as we don't provoke them, they won't attack us." Uther, Fred, and the rest of the people heard this and stopped their hands. Just as I had expected, the shadows didn't bother us anymore. They just kept smiling at us. "You're still the smart one. My bones are falling apart." Fred swung his arm, causing the fake Fred to imitate him. He could only reluctantly lower his arm, not daring to make the slightest movement. These shadows had nothing to do. As if they had rehearsed this, they lined up and pushed each other out of the stone house. Before they went out, they all turned around and waved at us with a smile. Fred spat and said, "I'm so masculine, but I didn't expect my own shadow to be so feminine." Disgusting. There was no danger for the time being, but the shadows in the wall were endless. We didn't dare to slack off. I tried to go to the mirror, but I couldn't breathe because of the pressure. Uther saw my abnormality and hurriedly asked, "Lyric, what happened?" "I can't move." I made a long story short. Uther came around and reached out to pull me over. Suddenly, his body shook violently, as if he had been electrocuted. "It's too strange." Uther retracted his hand and said with lingering fear, "Just as we were in a terrible fix, the broken pillars and burning braziers in the stone house started to crackle for some reason. Everyone was hiding in a place covered by collapsed soil and rocks. Fred seemed to have been bitten by some poisonous insect. He kept scratching his back with his hand. At first, no one paid much attention to it. But when Fred scratched wildly every few minutes, Queen Olivia felt that something was wrong. "Fred, your back is about to fester." Queen Olivia exclaimed in surprise. "I just feel itchy. Don't you guys feel the same?" Fred asked. "Now that you mention it, I also feel." Another elite dwarf warrior said, with some embarrassment. Avina immediately went behind Queen Olivia and checked her back. She found that Queen Olivia's back was also showing obvious signs of redness. There were even some chickenpox-like things growing on her back. Although her condition was better than Fred's, it was obvious that she had been poisoned. I also, Uther said, as if it was contagious, this inexplicable ulceration spread to everyone's body, including me. A strange, itchy acne appeared on my arm. Are we under some ancient curse? I remembered that there was a festering corpse at the entrance of the stone house. I immediately panicked. "Don't worry. I've never heard of this curse, and it's so strong. There must be something we haven't noticed," Uther said. "But we didn't touch anything," Fred said. I raised my head and stared at the 5 moon-like objects hanging from the roof. "Do you think those things are poisonous?" Queen Olivia asked when she saw me staring at the moon-like objects hanging from the roof. "How could moonlight cause festering? Unless there's some evil energy hidden in the moonlight that we haven't noticed," Uther said. "I think it might be that thing," I said, pointing at the bright spots behind the 5 moons. "Shall we go and take a closer look?" Avina suggested. "Yes," I nodded. Everyone looked at the 5 moons. They were actually emitting a faint light. But the faint light was particularly frightening. "Don't you think those look like 5 eyes?" Queen Olivia said with a trembling voice. Chapter 155. That's 5 eyeballs, I said confidently. Everyone got goosebumps when they heard me say that the glowing objects behind the moon were eyeballs. How could there be eyeballs that big and glowing? What kind of creature was that? I've seen something similar before, I said. I remembered reading in a book left behind by the Belgrave Flammaria. There was an eye-like object known as the evil eye. The evil eye's function had always been mysterious, and its abilities were unpredictable. At this moment, there was an evil eye growing on each of the moon-like objects. This should be an ancient evil eye, I said. Evil eye? What's that? Ivana looked at me in surprise. Queen Olivia also looked at me. She was curious as to how I knew about these things. How could I possibly know about the creatures of the abyss? This was the dwarf kingdom, and even she did not know about them. I read about it in an ancient book. In the early days, when humans had just acquired magic, the magic system was not very mature. So, they used the organs of some ancient beast to make some protective objects to scare away the invading demons. This evil eye is very famous. It is similar to a kind of enchantment. This enchantment does not prevent any creatures from approaching, but once they enter the enchantment's range, they will be attacked by death rays, poison rays, evil rays, and so on. The longer they stay in the enchantment, the more obvious the effects will be. It seems that the guy who died outside the stone house was actually killed by this evil eye, I said. How do you know about these things? That's amazing, Fred Sophia said, puzzled. Since I'm here, I naturally made some comprehensive preparations. I also read about it in an ancient book, I replied. Actually, I only read about this creature in an ancient book left behind by the Belgrave Flammaria. What should we do? Should we jump up and cover the eye? Uther asked. Yeah, I'll go up and try to deactivate the enchantment. If anything happens, you guys will be responsible for helping me, I said. Uther and Ivana nodded and prepared to move at any time. With the help of a few uneven spots, I easily leaped to the top of the stone house. Ouch! It hurts! I wanted to use my hand to remove the evil eye, but I found that my arm was rotting 10 times faster. My entire arm was beyond recognition. The closer I got, the worse the burning effect was. I gritted my teeth and forcefully removed the evil eye. The evil eye was a strange creature. Once I deactivated it, it would no longer emit that poisonous light. I knew how it worked, so I dared to take it. The evil eye was as big as a wash basin. When I plucked it off, my face was about to burst open. Fortunately, this thing was only embedded in a container similar to the moon. However, there were 5 of these evil eyes. I couldn't waste my time like this. After I plucked out one of the green evil eyes, I realized that the festering wounds on our bodies were slowly healing. Finally, everyone heaved a sigh of relief. We won't rot and die. As for the fact that the evil eye actually had color, I only discovered it after I plucked it out. I put the evil eye into my spatial ring and prepared to pluck the second one. But at this time, something unexpected happened. At this time, the roof began to shake. The 5 moonlight containers became restless and started to shake. Other than the moonlight container I plucked out of the green evil eye, the other 4 containers fell to the ground and shattered. Suddenly, a few evil eyes of different colors came out of the 4 broken moonlight containers. However, these 4 evil eyes were very different from the green one I put in my spatial ring. The 4 evil eyes that were released actually transformed into the form of living creatures, emitting a myriad of colors. There were black ones, white ones, red ones, and 1 yellow one. Everyone was at a loss. It seems that we can only use magic to destroy these 5 evil eyes. Ivana took the lead and took out her bow of snowdrift. She shot an ice arrow at one of the red evil eyes. But that evil eye emitted a scorching light like lava, melting the walls of the stone room. What a frightening power. Everyone was shocked. At this time, the black evil eye also made its move. A black ray of light shot out of the evil eye and directly hit an elite dwarf warrior who had no time to dodge and was using a shield to protect himself. Strangely, the elite dwarf warrior directly fell down like a corpse. Could it be that this was the evil eye that contained the power of death? If one was hit by its black light, they would immediately die. What a frightening power. No matter what, they couldn't be hit by this black evil eye. In the blink of an eye, the white evil eye emitted a dazzling white light. In an instant, all of us were caught off guard and were enveloped by this white light. We were all temporarily blinded. When we opened our eyes again, two elite dwarven warriors had been completely melted by the light emitted by the red evil eye. The strangest thing was that the yellow evil eye was actually emitting light directly, illuminating each and every one of us with the exact same image of ourselves. For a moment, there were two copies of each of us in the stone room. We couldn't tell who was who. Unlike the black shadows that walked out of the magic mirror, these transformed versions of us were exactly the same as us. At this time, I directly beheaded Queen Olivia, who was beside me. Queen Olivia turned into a ray of yellow light and disappeared. Everyone was shocked. They didn't know if I was real or fake. They also didn't know why I did it. Look at the shadows. These guys don't have shadows. At this time, Avina also reacted and shot one of the me to death with a frost arrow. For a moment, everyone looked at the shadows. Finally, these copies of us were killed. At this time, Uther took advantage of everyone's distraction and walked to the front of the magic mirror. At this time, the evil eyes became violet. But it was too late. Uther pressed his hand on the magic mirror. In an instant, the magic mirror became incomparably transparent. A cold light swept through the entire stone room. With a fierce cry, the evil eyes transformed into 4 different colored eyeballs. We looked at the transparent magic mirror. At first, we didn't know what we were looking at in the mirror. Each of us was looking at a different person. Only later, when we communicated with each other, did we know that the scene we saw was different. Chapter 156. At that time, the scene I saw was that I was alone. I encountered an incomparably huge black dragon. That black dragon flew away from a place filled with countless dragon skeletons. Uther said that what he saw was an endless number of skeletons. These skeletons were holding rusty weapons and surrounding us. Avina said she saw the ancient undead emperor at the bottom of Althalia's ice mountain. Queen Olivia said that what she saw was an endless fire engulfing Anrila. The dwarven dungeon had also become a scene of devastation. It was a horrible sight to behold. Fred didn't say much. He only said he saw skeletons. In fact, only he knew that he saw himself die in battle. The one who killed him was his brother, Harold. Looking at the 4 different colored eyeballs on the ground, Uther said he wanted them. The dwarves said they didn't like such evil things, so they definitely didn't want them. I took out the green eyeball from my spatial ring and gave it to Uther. Uther was very grateful to us. He said that he wanted to study the power of the evil eye. I told him that the power of the evil eye was terrible. They might have just entered a closed state, so he had to be careful. At this time, none of us noticed that the mysterious magic mirror had secretly undergone a change. When we first arrived here, it showed a group of shadows kneeling and worshiping. Later on, countless evil shadows that looked exactly like us walked out of the cave. Then, the evil eye began to attack us. The first one was a green one. It could release a poison that would fester our skin. But when Uther reached out his hand to touch the magic mirror, the evil eye instantly turned off and went into a closed state. What was the reason? How did Uther know to reach out his hand to touch the magic mirror? Uther said that he didn't know what he was thinking at that time. He felt that the magic mirror seemed to be summoning him. There was a very wonderful voice calling him to touch the magic mirror with his hand. After he did so, it actually had an effect. Right at that moment, the magic mirror released a dazzling light that forcefully sucked all of us in. We only saw darkness in front of us, and then we came to a place full of white light. "Kneel, my people," a woman's voice sounded, making our souls unable to resist. We saw that behind the dazzling white light, there was a shadow that we couldn't see clearly. "Welcome to the mirror of prophecy. Your every move is in the eyes of God. God is watching you. Submit to me, and I will be reborn." The woman's voice was very majestic. We began to kneel and worship the shadow that we couldn't see. In a flash, the surrounding white light disappeared, and the shadow disappeared in front of us. At this moment, a huge shadow emerged from the magic mirror within the stone room. The black shadows that looked exactly like us, but were slightly seductive, also gathered towards this huge black shadow from all directions. Soon, the huge black shadow condensed into a woman wearing a black robe. After 3,000 years, I am finally released from the mirror of prophecy. I didn't think that I, the Shadow Queen, would be rescued by a group of humans and dwarves. The seductive woman wearing a black robe showed a ghostly smile and disappeared from the stone room. The stone room returned to tranquility once again, as if we had never come here. The light of the magic mirror also disappeared without a trace. Our group felt that the dazzling white light in front of us disappeared, and we unexpectedly appeared in a place that we had never been to before. This place was very strange, but how strange was it? I will simply describe this strange place. First of all, this place was definitely underground, but there were a lot of buildings here. If only the buildings weren't strange, then the real strange thing was that there was a huge amount of red copper, magic crystals, red crystals, and purple crystals. These gems were inlaid on the ceiling of the underground cave. The dwarves looked and drooled. If they could take all of these, then it would be a considerable wealth, but they also knew that it was impossible to take all of them away. However, this wasn't the only strange place. The most dazzling thing here was the plaza in the center of the buildings. There was an altar there, and on the altar, there was an incomparably large image diamond. One had to know that image diamonds were very expensive. A small one could easily sell for several thousand gold coins in the Empire. This model was even more priceless. In all these years, no one had ever sold such a large image diamond. While we were still amazed by this strange cave, we didn't notice that there was anything strange about it. We were just curious. Who in the world built this place? The miracles in the abyss of despair were really one after another. We were sucked in by the mirror of prophecy. So where are we now? Who placed that incomparably large image diamond there? Before we could answer our questions, we were surrounded by countless gnomes. The dwarves had some understanding of these dwarves. They were actually a race of the same origin as the dwarves. However, because they lived underground for a long time, and because of their evil beliefs, they became ugly, hunchbacked, and even smaller than the dwarves. However, they were very treacherous and, at the same time, had high intelligence. They liked to hide in dark and damp caves and had their own culture and beliefs. Although they liked to wear cloth, they also knew how to make simple weapons and tools. They were violent and cruel by nature and loved to eat animals raw. They had their own social structure and were usually ruled by a dwarven chieftain. They were a typical race that bullied the weak and feared the strong. When facing a strong enemy or when their chieftain was killed, they would often choose to scatter. Sometimes, these dwarves had terrifying fighting strength and were hard to deal with. They valued their belongings very much, and if their belongings were stolen, they would do anything to take back what belonged to them. Sometimes, they would even kill each other in order to fight for their belongings. In short, if an ordinary person was surrounded by a large group of dwarves, it would be their greatest fortune to be able to escape. Right now, we were surrounded by a group of ferocious subterranean pygmies who were eyeing us covetously. What were we going to do about it? Chapter 157. When facing this large group of gnomes, I didn't have much fear in my heart. These guys could be considered as ordinary creatures. Since they were ordinary creatures, how could they be a match for me and Uther? One must know that we were both domain rank experts. Our domain rank aura alone was enough to suffocate an ordinary creature, let alone me and Uther working together. Seeing the gnomes with all kinds of weapons surrounding us, I didn't say anything and directly released my domain rank aura. I deliberately avoided the dwarves, but the gnomes weren't so lucky. In an instant, these gnomes, whether it was the ordinary gnomes with low fighting strength, the explosives and stone throwers of gnomes, even the cursemoncers who knew a bit of magic, or even the great chieftain of the gnomes, were all killed. They all fell to their knees at once. They had no choice but to submit to my might. At this time, Fred walked to the altar in the center of the building. There was a strange totem made of the skull of a snow domain yak. Not only was it a totem, it was also a flag. In front of these gnomes, Fred chopped the totem in half with his axe. The gnomes' faces instantly turned sinister, but they couldn't resist the aura. They gnashed their teeth in anger and glared at Fred. Next, Fred took the image diamond that was placed on the altar. This time, I could clearly sense that even with my powerful domain-level aura, I was unable to quell the rage of these gnomes who had reached the pinnacle of resistance. I was almost unable to suppress them. Fortunately, Uther released his aura in time, and I felt the pressure lessen a bit. These gnomes were angry but didn't dare to speak. They were so angry that their bodies trembled. It seemed that they would tear Fred apart in the next second. Fred played with the image diamond in his hand. The image diamond was very big and heavy. However, just as he was playing with it, a figure came out of the building. Strangely, that guy wasn't suppressed by Uther or my aura. It seemed that he wasn't ordinary. If the gnome's appearance was incomparably ugly, then the person who spoke must have never seen it before. I read about it in a book from the Belgrave Flammaria. This guy should be a stitched monster created by a magician who studied the undead. The raw materials for the flesh and blood of the giant stitch monster should have been taken from the surroundings of the dwarf kingdom's Althalia ice peak. It seemed that the main sources were the frost ancient giants, snow yaks, snow hairy men, snow apes, mammoths, saber-toothed tigers, and all kinds of scattered corpses. The beauty of the stitched monsters allowed these dead creatures to move in the form of living creatures. In the bodies of these stitched-together monsters, all the physiological systems were functioning normally. The blood circulation system provided energy, the digestive system took in nutrients, the nervous system and the motor system provided mobility, and the metabolic system was like that of ordinary creatures. New cells were constantly being produced to replace the old and dead cells. Because of this, these sinister and frightening things actually seemed to have a life force that was about to collapse. This was the masterpiece of the undead magic fusion monsters. If a curious researcher were to dissect it, they would definitely be shocked by these amazing creations. This was simply a terrifying life form created by humans, a monster born to kill. However, since it was pieced together from the tissues of corpses, it was inevitable that this fellow would also have a strange stench. This stinking stitched monster walked towards Phyllide, who was playing with the shadow diamond. 5 or 6 long arms of snow apes hung from its fat body. It shuddered as it walked, and the stench of green water dripped down from the stitched marks on its belly. Phyllide was too focused on playing with the shadow diamond. It was only when he smelled the pungent smell that he noticed something was wrong. He turned around and was almost scared silly. However, his warrior instincts immediately made him pick up the double-edged axe in his hand and hack at the stitched monster. The sharp edge of the axe quickly cut open the stitched monster's skin. Phyllide saw a yellowish-brown layer of fat inside and dense muscles below. After cutting open the muscles with some effort, he saw a green liquid flowing below. It looked like blood, but also like some kind of special body fluid. This liquid was continuously secreted from a kind of translucent colloid. After separating the colloid, he saw the internal organs of the stitched monster, as well as a surprisingly large animal organ. He realized that some things on the stitched monster were more complicated than he had imagined. Not to mention other things, just the fact that it could create a stitched monster and create a life form was extremely shocking. If he wanted to understand the core knowledge of the stitched monster, it would be impossible for mages who didn't have a deep understanding of undead magic. The stitched monster's reaction was a little slow. It only reacted after Phyllide had cut open a large piece of it. The stitched monster was instantly enraged. It howled, and the tentacles on its back hooked Phyllide's head and pressed it deep into the green water on its belly. When Phyllide raised his head again, he had already fainted from the green water. At this moment, the others saw the situation and wanted to help. They couldn't just watch Phyllide get killed by the monster. The stitched monster laughed loudly. It opened its distorted mouth and said to us in the German language, "How is it, dwarves? It tastes great, doesn't it?" Ha! I could see that the stitched monster was very happy. It seemed to like teasing its enemies, or rather, its prey. What I didn't expect was that this guy had a high IQ and could speak the German language. Why were all the monsters in the abyss of despair able to speak the German language? What I didn't expect was that the stitched monster's body, which had been cut open by Philide's axe, had automatically healed. It was really mysterious and terrifying. I couldn't help but take this terrifying monster seriously. The stitched monster seemed to have a lot of strength. Although it was a little fat, it looked like it had a lot of strength. It was about half the size of an ancient giant, and its body stank. The stitched monster wasn't afraid of pain, and its weight was astonishing. It simply stood there and gave people an invisible deterrent force. Pitiful people, my name is Lord Clement. Today, I'll let you know why you died. I'm in a good mood today, and I can slowly torture you to death one by one. Ha! The stitched monster, who called himself Lord Clement, couldn't stop laughing. His laughter echoed throughout the cave. What was worse was that I found that these gnomes didn't seem to be afraid of Uther and me. They were starting to get restless. Chapter 158. Suddenly, a gnome cursemancer broke free from Uther's and my domain pressure. He directly released a chain lightning. Electricity spread out from his staff and shot towards the elite dwarven warriors. In any case, they were elite dwarven warriors. They didn't feel any pressure against these gnomes. The remaining elite dwarven warriors waved their weapons and called for the gnomes to charge forward. They either split open a gnome archer's head with their axes or smashed a gnome warrior's head with their hammers. For a moment, the whole cave was filled with blood and chaos. At this time, the stitch-free Clement was preparing to attack Fred, who wasn't willing to put down the image diamond. Sometimes, the greed of the dwarves would kill them. However, Fred was lucky. Uther and I were here. How could we let him be killed by the stitched-free Clement? I couldn't control this group of gnomes anymore. These gnomes could only be dealt with by the dwarves and Avina. Uther and I had to deal with the stitch-free Clement. After all, he was the biggest threat here. Fred was about to be killed by the stitched freak. However, it seemed that the stitched freak was deliberately not killing Fred. Fred held his axe with one hand and chopped at the stitched freak Clement. At the same time, he tightly held onto the image diamond. The stitched freak Clement wasn't in a hurry to attack him and let him attack him. In any case, he wasn't afraid of Fred's double-edged axe. Anyway, the parts that were chopped off would automatically regenerate. There was no pain. This body was simply the stitched freak Clement's weapon and equipment. Seeing that Uther and I had rushed over, the stitched free Clement knew that we were strong. Therefore, he didn't dare to be negligent. He only waved his hand, and Fred was heavily thrown to the wall of the cave by the Yeti arm. He fainted, and the image diamond fell from his hand. Seeing this, I didn't say anything and put the image diamond into my spatial ring. Clement the stitched freak was furious. He knew that Fred wouldn't be able to take the shadow diamond away, so he tricked him. However, I made the shadow diamond disappear, and it really became a shadow diamond. Clement the stitched freak flew into a rage. "You thief! Gnomes, let's kill this thief who stole the shadow diamond." Stitch freak Clement shouted. However, the gnomes didn't seem to understand the German language and were busy dealing with the dwarves. Clement had no choice but to deal with me and Uther alone. Everyone was busy fighting against their own enemies. Uther and I didn't dare to underestimate the stitched freak Clement. I held the sword of retribution in my hand and infused Yanlong's power into the sword. Flames ignited the sword of retribution. At the same time, I transformed into a half-dragon and slashed at the stitched monster Clement a few times. The scorching dragon flames made the stitched freak Clement cry out in pain. The visible wounds and the burnt smell made the cave even murkier. I didn't give him a chance to breathe and kept on attacking his hideous, filthy, horrible body. Uther didn't join in the fight. Instead, he killed some of the gnomes who rushed up. He felt that I could deal with Clement alone, and he didn't need to help me for the time being. From the looks of it, I alone was enough to deal with Clement. I didn't need anyone else's help. I was very confident in my strength. After all, I had trained hard for such a long time. In addition to the training I received in the magic space of the first leader, Bregan Martin, I still had terrifying strength. However, what I didn't expect was that although my attacks were strong, This guy's regenerative ability had reached a terrifying level. New flesh grew out, and wounds were sewn up. Haha, human. I admit that you are strong, but you can't kill me with this level of strength. Isn't it my turn to attack? Stitch Freak Clement laughed maliciously. This guy was like a yak as he rushed towards me. At this moment, the dwarves and gnomes were fighting in other parts of the cave. The ground was covered with gnome corpses, but there were only 1 or 2 elite dwarven warriors. However, due to the lack of physical strength, these dwarves' movements began to slow down. At this moment, Fred slowly woke up. He immediately looked at the image diamond in his hand. When he realized that the image diamond in his hand was gone, he roared and rushed towards the gnomes with his double-edged axe. With a bloody whirlwind, the gnome blasters, gnome javelin throwers, and gnome cursemancers were all badly mutilated. More than half of them were dead or injured. Queen Olivia and Avina were also constantly killing the gnome warriors. They gradually felt that their strength was falling short of their desire. However, there was no other way. Once they stopped killing, the gnomes would rush towards them like a tide. It was impossible to kill all of them. These gnomes were also fighting with their lives on the line. Their eyes were red from killing, and they were dauntless. They were not afraid of death. They only wanted to take back the image diamond, but they didn't know that the image diamond was already in my space ring. Facing the Stitch Free Clement, who rushed towards me like a yak, I didn't want to dodge. After all, as a descendant of the Belgrave Flammarial, I had a certain amount of confidence in my physical strength. Under the obstruction of my Yin Long's anger, the Stitched Free Clement's body was already injured. He was also enduring the severe pain, but he didn't care about that. I fought the Stitch Free Clement in close combat. This guy's attacks were really terrifying. He even knew the frost breath of the ancient frost giants. For a while, we were evenly matched. This was something I didn't expect. Uther killed the gnome chieftain, but the gnomes didn't retreat or run away. He saw that I hadn't finished off the Stitched Free Clement, so he rushed over to help. Fred was sullen all the way. The pain of losing the image diamond made him lose his mind. His fighting skills made him like a god of death, constantly killing the gnomes. If these gnomes didn't hate him so much, they would have been scared away by his appearance. These gnomes didn't care about the consequences anymore. The pressure on Avina and Queen Olivia's side eased a little. There were only 2 elite dwarven warriors left. At this time, no one noticed that there was actually a coffin made of stone under the altar. Uther and I joined forces, and the Stitched Free Clement began to lose. At this moment, a crisp cracking sound rang out, and the stone slab covering the stone coffin shattered. Everyone heard a low roar. "Haha, he's awake. You're finished," the Stitch Free Clement said with a smile. At the same time, he was preparing to escape. Chapter 159. The Stitch Free Clement was fighting with us when I noticed that he was trying to escape. You want to escape? Not so easy. I want to take advantage of the advantage and kill this Stitch Free Clement in one go. You want to kill me? Not so easy, the Stitched Free Clement said confidently. Thus, just as we were about to kill him, his outer shell was suddenly covered with blood-red flecks. They were so thick and dense. Asterisk bang. Asterisk, that huge body actually exploded in front of us. Our bodies were covered in minced meat and blood clots, as well as some organs of unknown animals. They exploded all over our bodies. Fortunately, my body was strong enough, and this explosion didn't hurt me. Uther's situation was slightly better. But this way, Clement took advantage of the opportunity to escape. It's a pity that I couldn't kill you with my own hands. But the next Skeleton King will be useless even if you have wings. Fortunately, I ran fast enough. Otherwise, that Lord Skeleton King would have killed all of them. However, I don't think anyone knows the secret of my body. The Stitched Free Clement secretly rejoiced as he escaped from the cave. Just as I was regretting that I couldn't kill the Stitched Free Clement, a roar came from the cave and attracted my attention. What is it this time? I asked Uther. I don't know. The things in this abyss of despair are unfathomable. Uther shook his head helplessly. At this time, a monster with only a skeleton body crawled out from the stone coffin. This skeleton monster was very tall and wore broken black armor. He stretched out his skeletal hand and pulled out a bone greatsword from his spine. At this time, I discovered the exit of the cave while chasing after the stitched freak Clement. The skeleton king stretched out its hand, and countless white bones appeared on the ground of the cave. The number of white bones was too shocking. The white bones drilled out of the ground and automatically pieced together to form skeleton men. These skeleton men were skeleton warriors with melee weapons, skeleton archers, and even skeleton mages with magic. This huge army of skeletons shocked everyone present. At this moment, the pygmies didn't want to fight anymore. Like Clement, they fled in panic, but many of them were mercilessly killed by the skeleton army. Avina, come here. I couldn't care less. I knew that this guy wasn't ordinary. Since I found the exit, I might as well escape. At this moment, the skeleton king rushed towards me and slashed at me with its bone greatsword. I didn't dare to be careless and used all my strength to block it with my sword of punishment. In just a moment, I felt like my entire body was covered in the aura of death. This guy was much stronger than me. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Avina and Uther desperately escaped towards the exit of the cave. Queen Olivia and Fred could not escape. They were entangled by the skeleton army and could only fight to the death. They brandished their weapons and continuously slashed at the soulless skeleton warriors. At the same time, they had to dodge the attacks of the skeleton mages and skeleton archers. Only a few pygmies in this cave managed to escape. The rest were all turned into corpses. The elite dwarf warriors were also completely dead. Suddenly, new skeletons stood up from these corpses. It seemed that the number of enemies was increasing as the fight went on. Run! I urged Avina and Uther to run. This skeleton king's strength was too terrifying. Avina turned around and saw a tall skeleton covered in black armor. It was wielding a bone greatsword and chasing after me. My clothes were torn, and I was slightly embarrassed as I dodged. The skeleton furiously swung its sword down and almost cut off my ear. I rolled over on the dusty ground, just out of the way. Seeing the skeleton king getting closer and closer to me, my heart was filled with fear. I couldn't help but wish that I could fly faster. I heard a mournful scream from inside the cave. Avina turned around and saw the skeleton king slap me to the ground. I seemed to have lost all my fighting strength. I was like a corpse lying on the ground, motionless. Just as the skeleton king's greatsword was about to slash down, Uther pulled me away from the skeleton king's sword. The skeleton king was furious and let out a beast-like roar. Hearing that roar, Avina's heart trembled. Uther handed me in his arms to Avina. Avina, you take Laric and leave first. I will stop this skeleton king. Uther. Avina was so grateful that she didn't know what to say. Hurry, the skeleton king is about to catch up. If we don't leave now, none of us will be able to. Avina looked at Uther gratefully. Uther, I will come back to you after I hide Laric. After saying that, Avina took me away from this place. Looking at the skeleton king who was getting closer and closer to him, Uther didn't have any confidence. It wasn't that he wanted to play the hero, but the skeleton king was simply too terrifying. Anyone who could escape would be a survivor. The skeleton king was stabbed by Uther's starry sky spear, and a big hole suddenly appeared in its body. The black gas lingering on the skeleton king's body faded a little. A big hole appeared in its armor, and new bones began to grow. It was really scary. It seemed that it was reasonable that I couldn't beat the skeleton king. Damn it, it didn't die. The furious skeleton king roared loudly. Uther attacked again, and at the same time, he started to run. The skeleton king howled and chased after Uther with its greatsword. The skeleton king's swordsmanship was very fast. Just by nimbly dodging, Uther was injured. Didn't the legends say that skeletons' movements were very stiff? The skeleton king's strength was simply terrifying. Uther kept attacking the skeleton king with his starry sky spear, but the skeleton king didn't dodge. The black gas on its body faded for a moment and then thickened again. On the contrary, Uther's behavior really angered the skeleton king. Uther was also angry. He already had a lot of injuries on his body and didn't want to run. Since the starry sky spear didn't work, then I will directly kick your 2 leg bones away. Let's see how you chase after me." Uther ruthlessly threw a roundhouse kick toward Skeleton King's leg bone. As Uther expected, the leg bones were kicked away. However, in the next second, the 2 leg bones flew back to the Skeleton King's legs. However, the Skeleton King's attack, the great sword, directly passed by Uther's hair. He was almost cut to death. Uther turned over and dodged. At this time, he pressed one hand on the ground and stared at the Skeleton King with murderous intent. That strong, murderous aura made even the undead Skeleton King hesitate. Chapter 160. Wuthers' whole body was shrouded in light blue light. The snow fox who had been lying on his shoulder was also grimacing because she also felt a great threat at this time. Suddenly, the snow fox jumped on the ground and began to slowly grow bigger. The space here was extremely wide and the height couldn't be seen at a glance. In this kind of place, the snow fox was actually the same as the snow domain's double-headed wolf, becoming incomparably huge. Skeleton King seemed to be small in front of the snow fox. Skeleton King began to wave his huge bone sword towards the snow fox. Who would have thought that the snow fox would extend her white claws to block the attack of Skeleton King? Skeleton King himself could not believe it. He was an absolute powerhouse among the domain stage. Just that simple sword strike of his contained the law of death. Skeleton King was also called Skeleton King Leal. He was an envoy sent by Azrael Hessendes. In terms of strength, he was much stronger than ancient corpse Emperor Barasa, who made a deal with Azrael Hessendes. In fact, Skeleton King Leal was sent here to assist ancient corpse Emperor Barasa on the surface. But in fact, he was sent here to monitor ancient corpse Emperor Barasa's every move. Lancelot, the necromancer who made a deal with Azrael, was sealed in his dream. Azrael began to be wary of his spokesperson in the human world, especially ancient corpse Emperor, who was killed by Lancelot. The reason why Azrael chose Barasa was that Barasa's soul power was stronger than Lancelot's. Moreover, Barasa's resentment was stronger than Lancelot's. He was simply an excellent candidate for Azrael's spokesperson in the human world. Ancient corpse Emperor Barasa was killed by Lancelot. His soul wasn't reconciled. The treacherous Azrael induced him to make a deal with Azrael. He became an ancient corpse emperor and gained the ability to control corpses. Of course, only the ancient corpse emperor himself knew the price of this. Skeleton King Leal saw that the snow fox had suddenly become very strong. Originally, he was too lazy to pay attention to this little snow fox lying on Uther's shoulder. At this time, Uther jumped on the back of the snow fox. The snow fox was immediately shrouded by the light blue radiance. Like a protective membrane, the snow fox let out a long howl. She looked at Skeleton King Leal with disdain in her eyes. "Old friend, it seems that we have to show our true strength today. Otherwise, this skeleton will really look down on us," Uther said to the snow fox with a smile. The snow fox nodded, but she couldn't speak. Skeleton King Leal decided to attack first. Since the Bone Blade Greatsword had no effect on the snow fox, then he would try the Bone Blade Greatsword. He wanted to see if this human and fox could withstand the countless bone blades. Skeleton King Leal shouted and fiercely threw the bone sword towards Uther and the snow fox. In an instant, the bone sword changed shape and scattered into countless small bone swords. Countless bone blades were flying towards Uther and Snow Fox from the dark and spacious cave. They looked like small knives as they rushed towards Uther and Snow Fox. Uther used the Starry Sky Spear to shoot down those sharp bone swords. The Snow Fox nimbly carried Uther and dodged in the cave. The remaining bone swords were directly blocked by Uther's Starry Sky Shield. If an ordinary person was here, they would have been reduced to minced meat. At this time, I also recovered a little. I could feel their battle from afar. I knew that I still had a long way to go. Worthy of being a cultivator of the extreme north, Uther and his mysterious snow fox were really full of secrets. Their strength was also more terrifying than it looked. At this time, Avina was beside me to take care of me. "How are they?" Avina asked with concern. "They are fine. Don't worry." Uther's strength is far above mine. After all, he has been cultivating for so many years. His strength is really not ordinary. Even if we go, we may not be able to help much. We may only cause trouble for them. I said with a sigh. After listening to me, Avina's worried heart was also relieved. She knew that her strength was very weak, and she couldn't help much. At this time, the two of us had the mood to look around. I found that the cave was very spacious. It was completely different from before. At the same time, it was much colder. The surroundings were still very dim. I could only feel that the cave was very big, but I couldn't see how big it was. I was too lazy to pay attention to it. I still wanted to see how Uther was doing. I saw that Uther and the snow fox didn't sit still and wait for death. After they avoided the bone sword's attack, they quickly rushed towards Skeleton King Leal. Skeleton King Leal saw that a man and a fox were attacking him. He didn't dodge. Instead, he directly stretched out two white bone claws to catch Uther and the others. However, the agile snow fox dodged. One of the bone claws scratched the snow fox's leg. Although there was a light blue protective cover, the snow fox still suffered a light injury. It could be seen that the bone claws were very powerful. One must know that ordinary attacks couldn't hurt the snow fox. Skeleton King Leal saw that the bone claws didn't catch the snow fox and Uther. He directly released a bone prison. From the top of the cave, a huge bone prison made of white bones fell from the sky. This time, the snow fox couldn't escape and was directly trapped by the bone prison. The bone prison not only shrank but also grew many bone spikes. The snow fox and Uther were injured by the incomparably hard bone spikes. This time, even the light blue protective cover couldn't stop the bone spikes. It could be seen that Skeleton King Leal's strength was terrifying. Blood flowed down the snow fox's white fur. Uther wasn't much better. If this continued, Skeleton King Leal didn't have to do anything. Both Uther and the snow fox would be trapped to death here. Skeleton King Leal revealed a satisfied smile. I was very worried. I wanted to help Uther and the snow fox. However, before I could move, Uther endured the pain and forcibly broke the bone spikes. His hands condensed a large amount of magic. The light blue radiance on his body became stronger and stronger. After a burst, the bone prison was broken. Skeleton King Leal revealed a surprised expression. He didn't believe that this human could break his bone prison. However, Uther didn't give Skeleton King Leal time to think. The snow fox exerted force and jumped. Uther seized the opportunity and used all his strength to throw the star spear towards Skeleton King Leal. It was aimed at the hollow heart of Skeleton King Leal. Helplessly, Skeleton King Leal knew the power of this move. His body began to transform. Huge white bones grew out from his body and tore the armor into pieces. Finally, these white bones formed a white bone armor outside his body. He didn't know whether he could block this attack. However, he wasn't afraid of death. Death was just another form of eternal life. Chapter 161. The star spear pierced through the dark cave like a meteor and pierced towards Skeleton King Leal. Skeleton King Leal was calm. He wanted to test whether his bones were harder or Uther's spear was harder. Bang! There was a loud sound, followed by creaking sounds, which made people feel very uncomfortable. Skeleton King Leal lowered his head and looked at his body. His indestructible bone armor was pierced through by the star spear. Skeleton King Leal didn't dare to believe that the star spear had ruthlessly pierced his heart. He was very angry. He had never been in such a difficult situation like today. His heart was pierced by a human spear. However, Skeleton King Leal didn't fall. He wouldn't die if this was the extent of the attack. He pulled out the spear that was stuck in his heart and threw it on the ground. He looked at Uther and Snow Fox. He thought that since both of them knew how to use spears, it was a coincidence that he knew how to use them. Now, let's see if he can catch my spear or not. Skeleton King Leal waved his hand, and 7 or 8 bone spears appeared out of thin air. Those bone spears were suspended in the air. Skeleton King Leal's thought moved, and those bone spears were like arrows shot by a wild horse. They flew towards Uther and Snow Fox at a fast speed. Uther and Snow Fox knew that the situation wasn't good. They quickly retreated. However, those bone spears could not only track them, but they were also extremely fast. Ding! 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 Uther and Snow Fox were nailed to the wall of the cave by the bone spears. Skeleton King Leal immediately flew over and waved his bone sword to behead them. At this time, I also flew over. I had completely transformed into a dragon and spat out a mouthful of scorching dragon flames. Skeleton King Leal was caught off guard because my speed was also extremely fast. The scorching dragon flames directly roasted Skeleton King Leal's bones into charcoal. When the wind blew, Skeleton King Leal disappeared into thin air. However, it didn't seem that simple. Skeleton King Leal didn't die, and the bone spears that were nailed to Uther and Snow Fox didn't disappear. Inside the cave, there was a strange thing that looked like a heart. However, that heart wasn't made of flesh but of bone. Slowly, that bone heart was restored and condensed at a speed visible to the naked eye, forming a new Skeleton King Leal. I didn't expect that I would attack the Skeleton King Leal again. This time, Skeleton King Leal took the initiative to attack. He used his move to perish together with the enemy. He wasn't afraid of death. He only wanted to return to Azrael Hassendi's embrace as soon as possible. The enemy in front of him was the enemy. It was better to kill the enemy. Everything happened too fast, so much so that we didn't have time to react. We only saw Skeleton King Leal turn into a sky full of skeletons in a flash. It was as if a storm of death had swept over us. It seemed that Uther, Snow Fox, and I were doomed. Were we going to die here? This time, I really had a bad premonition. In my eyes, this Skeleton King was no different from a dead man. What was the point of living without flesh and blood? No, I don't want to die. I have blood and flesh. I have Avina. I have the people I love and the people who love me. I want to protect them. At this moment, my body felt an incomparably strong power. I actually used Yenlong's form to release the starry sky. That starry sky that could devour everything turned the terrifying white-boned city and Skeleton King Leal into nothingness, disappearing into the boundless starry sky. I released such a powerful magic spell that was beyond my capacity. I instantly reverted to my human form and fell onto the uneven ground. The bone spears that nailed Uther and Snow Fox also disappeared. They also fell, and Snow Fox returned to her original appearance. Uther was also seriously injured, but he was in the best condition of the three of us. Avina was worried about us, so she also came. She knew that she couldn't help much, but she didn't want to do nothing. Just like that, Uther picked up the Snow Fox and picked up the Spear of Starry Sky from the ground. Together with AI Wayna, they carried the unconscious and injured me up. The three of us walked towards the cold and empty depths of the cave. We knew that we weren't far from the ancient corpse emperor. After an unknown amount of time, I finally woke up. I smiled bitterly. This battle was really difficult. Since the beginning of the Abyss of Despair, none of the dwarves had reached this place. I wonder if Queen Olivia and Fred are still alive? The three of us walked for an unknown amount of time in the dark cave. Suddenly, an icefall hung in front of us. We could vaguely see that there seemed to be a huge, palace-like building on top of the icefall. We didn't hesitate. Since we were already here, we might as well make the best of it. We directly flew above the icefall. As expected, there was a majestic palace here. Looking at the architectural style and appearance, I felt a sense of déjà vu, as if I had seen it somewhere before. I suddenly remembered that this was the ice version of the Temple of Hassendi's. I had seen almost the exact same building in Lancelot's palace in the Undead Witch King. It seemed that the ancient corpse Emperor Barassa was here. The three of us looked at each other and smiled. After being together for so long, we didn't need to speak too much. Sometimes we could understand each other with just a glance. This was the tacit understanding between us. When we arrived at the huge ice door of this ice version of the Harsendis shrine, I stepped forward and pushed open the door that seemed to be made of ice. Strangely, I didn't use any strength, but the door slowly opened on its own. Did the ancient corpse emperor already know of our arrival? But it didn't matter. It didn't matter whether he knew or not. We could even deal with the Skeleton King Leal. Although we couldn't use the same ultimate move as before, Uther and I had the help of Avina's elf, Ronwhip. We were confident that we could defeat the ancient Corpse Emperor. We entered the main hall of the Temple of Hescendes. It was a huge and spacious hall. As soon as we entered the spacious hall, the furnaces in the hall emitted a ghostly blue light. The light emitted by the blue flames was strange. It was cold here. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that ordinary people would turn into ice as soon as they entered this place. At this time, a man was sitting on an ice-cold throne in the hall. I had seen this man before. It was Barasa, the former Holy Emperor of the German Empire. Now, the ancient Corpse Emperor was feared by the dwarves. You're finally here. I've waited long enough for this day. The ancient Corpse Emperor's voice resounded. His German language made people shudder. Chapter 162. I didn't expect you to come here. Since that's the case, let's add some firewood to our party. That way, we can enjoy ourselves to the fullest, right? Ancient Corpse Emperor Barasa stepped down from his throne. In the spacious and cold hall, the ancient Corpse Emperor waved his hands, and a light blue flame ignited in his hands. A powerful aura pressed down on us. The ancient Corpse Emperor's aura was even stronger than that of the Skeleton King Leal. Didn't Skeleton King Leal say that he was Azrael's messenger and that he was stronger than the ancient Corpse Emperor? At this time, the entire territory of the Dwarf Kingdom was covered in ice. No matter how thick the snow was, countless ghouls broke out of the ground. Among them were ancient giants, dwarves, dermen, and countless corpses of unknown races. Hundreds of thousands of ghouls gathered from all directions. They were gathering in 3 places: the old capital of the Dwarf Kingdom, Enrila, Furnace Fort, and Warsong Fort. A dwarf warrior patrolling on an airship was startled when he saw the dense mass of shadows moving at high speed on the ground. How many ghouls were there? At the same time, the ghouls attacked the 3 dwarven fortresses at the same time. All the dwarves were forced to protect their homes. In the hall of Azrael Hescendes, Uther, Avina, and I were facing the ancient Corpse Emperor. We knew that this would be an unprecedentedly fierce battle. The ancient Corpse Emperor didn't bother to talk nonsense with us. He was wearing dark gold plate armor and a crown on his head. He held the Song of the Conqueror in his hand. He looked the same as before, but he didn't have the slightest trace of blood, and his body was rotten. In the past, after he was killed by Lancelot, Azrael Hescendes made a deal with him. In order to take revenge, he agreed to Azrael's condition. His soul would always belong to Azrael Hescendes. After so many years, the deal with Azrael had been like Lancelot's. It was torture. He had become a puppet controlled by someone else. However, he still told us that killing Skeleton King Leal was a good thing for him. A wave of cold air swept over. This ancient Corpse Emperor had absorbed countless resentment in this world in front of us, which made him even stronger. Whether and I are not sure that we can deal with this ancient Corpse Emperor, but there are some things that we have to face. The ancient Corpse Emperor waved his sword nimbly. Under the cold light, dozens of wriggling Azrael's tentacles appeared out of thin air on the smooth floor of the hall. Once touched by these tentacles, we would either die or be injured. More importantly, these tentacles could track us and were difficult to destroy. I had no choice but to transform into Yenlong's form. I didn't dare to slack off in the slightest. Uther also held the Starry Sky Spear and was ready to enter battle mode at any time. 2 enormous black wings sprouted from Barasa's back. They were the wings of death. For a moment, we were facing off against Barasa in midair. Come out, primordial frost giant. Ancient Corpse Emperor Barasa cast a summoning spell in midair. The ground shook, and the corpse of an enormous primordial frost giant appeared in front of us. Avina also summoned the elf Ronwhip. Ronwhip was as happy as a child when he came out of the magic space, but he had been summoned at the most dangerous time. However, he seemed to be much bigger than before. Wuther and the enlarged snow fox worked together to deal with the primordial frost giant. Ronwhip and I dealt with the ancient Corpse Emperor Barasa directly. Avina was responsible for dealing with those annoying Azrael's tentacles. And so, the battle officially began. The ancient corpse emperor dashed toward me at incredible speed. He extended his terrifying left hand, which was completely black. It was his famous decaying claw. His right hand swung the battle sword, the Song of the Conqueror, which was shrouded in black energy. I also rushed forward at full speed. I was very confident in my body. After all, I was the Belgrave Flamarya, the descendant of a demon god. When my claws came into contact with the decaying claw and the Song of the Conqueror, which was shrouded in black energy, I could feel an attack that contained the power of death shaking my very soul. This attack was so strange that it could even attack my soul. But I could still hold on. Ronwhip was behind the ancient corpse emperor, trying to attack him. Taste the power of my siphon of death. The ancient corpse emperor's left hand broke free, elongated, and pressed against Ronwhip's head. Ronwhip's vision darkened, and his body twitched as if he was going to die in the next second. Oh, interesting. You're immune to all magic attacks. The ancient corpse emperor looked at Ronwhip in surprise. Ronwhip twitched in the air for a while, but he didn't fall. I seized the opportunity to hit the ancient corpse emperor's stomach with my dragon horn. At the same time, I spat out a mouthful of dragon flame. Half of the ancient corpse emperor's body disappeared, but he was unwilling to give up. On the ground was covered with broken ice. Avina had finally dealt with all of the Reaper's tentacles. She was also panting. Weather had also smashed the ancient frost giant into pieces. However, the ancient frost giant wasn't dead yet. The ancient corpse emperor flew down and opened his mouth to devour the incomplete ancient frost giant. A corpse eating another corpse. I had never seen such a scene before. After the ancient frost giant was eaten, not even its bones were left. The ancient corpse emperor stood in front of us in perfect condition. If it weren't for the residue at the corner of his mouth, I wouldn't have believed it. Ronwhip had returned to the magic space because Avina was exhausted. This time we won't be so lucky, the ancient corpse emperor said to us. At the same time, his body began to expand rapidly. Not good. He's going to explode. I felt that the biggest difficulty in fighting against these undead creatures was that they weren't afraid of death, and they used death as a weapon. I had seen the Skeleton King Leal use a technique similar to corpse explosion, so I knew how powerful it was. It seemed that the ancient corpse emperor was going to fight us to the death. Lyric, everything you've seen has been built on lies and deceptions. One day, you will understand the meaning of my words. The ancient corpse emperor's words echoed in the hall. I didn't dare to relax. I knew that it was the most critical moment. When a person is in the most dangerous situation, there will always be a way out. I firmly believe that. I also used my strongest attack. As a result, the collision of the two forces caused the entire hall to shatter. Broken walls and fences were everywhere. Chapter 163. The ancient corpse Emperor Barassa recalled his high-spirited self, the founder of the German Empire, conquering the entire continent with Lancelot. Who would have thought that he would be betrayed by the person he trusted the most in the Dwarf Kingdom, and his army would be completely annihilated? Filled with anger and unwillingness, he was reborn as the ancient corpse emperor, but in the end, he was just a pawn of God. Now, he could finally rest in peace. He would never be controlled by anyone again, even if doing so would only make him vanish into thin air. The dazzling explosion was like a star, and the hall was shattered. I was covered in wounds. Fortunately, Avina and Uther were still alive, and the snow fox had returned to its normal size, lying in Uther's arms. There was no trace of his existence. The ancient corpse emperor had disappeared just like that, and I had resisted his strongest attack with my own strength. At this time, the entire hall began to collapse. To be precise, the entire ice peak of Althalia was collapsing. I found that behind the hall was a sea of bones. The bones there weren't the bones of ordinary animals on the road, but the bones of dragons. There were endless skeletons of dragons. We walked over, and at that moment I felt a powerful force, which swept through my whole body. This feeling was from Adhol's magic equipment. Something that looked like a boot flew out of the dragon's skeleton and flew into my body. It merged with my soul. I instantly entered another world, and I saw a black dragon. He was the black dragon Irdeel, the wing of destruction. He only left behind his back. This is the White Bone War boot, also known as Adhol's footprint. The skeletons of the dragons here had been casually killed by Athol. The dragon soul power of these dragons will dissipate after so many years, but it's still enough for you to use. I'll take it as a gift for our first meeting. Right now, you already have the strength to meet me. Although we met once at the enchanter's place, you were unconscious at that time. This time, you have the strength to meet me. I have something to tell you. This is no longer a matter of mortals, but of God. After saying that, the black dragon Irdeel turned into a black light and disappeared into the pile of dragon bones. I only felt that my surroundings were instantly surrounded by an incomparably powerful dragon soul power, just like the time when Sea Dragon Nogias and Jiran D. Lego were dragon soul power. But here, countless dragon soul power of nameless dragons were surrounding me. I instantly felt that I had taken a qualitative leap. Seeing the changes in me, Averna and Uther were surprised. At this time, the entire ice peak of Althalia felt like it was about to collapse. Fred and Queen Olivia actually arrived. On the other hand, facing the endless army of ghouls, the Dwarf King Gino Wildhammer rode on a wild boar and used the war hammer that he received from his father, who died in battle. He desperately led the dwarves to resist the ghouls that had invaded the dwarven underground city. He used his ultimate skill, Hammer Roar, but he was outnumbered and died on the battlefield. Before he died, he thought of his great father and his queen, Olivia. On the side of the furnace fortress, Dolam Iron Drill held a one-handed hammer and a shield as he fought on his white bear. The dwarf chieftain Billy also used earth magic to attack the ghouls. Even the ancient giant father had to help the dwarves defend themselves against the ghouls because his only son had died in the hands of the ghouls. The Warsong Fortress was also breached by the ghouls. Broken steam chariots, stopped bronze puppets, crashed dwarven airships, abandoned magic crystal cannons, and flames and corpses were everywhere. Just when the dwarves thought that they couldn't resist anymore, the ghouls that were still fighting with them a second ago suddenly turned into ice and shattered. Thus, this tragic battle ended at the same time that the ancient corpse emperor disappeared. Everything had ended, but this was only the beginning. Our group discovered that the exit of the cave was at the end of the pile of corpses. So, we tried our best to leave this place before the entire Althalia ice mountain collapsed. We ran for our lives without caring about anything. However, the cave suddenly started to move. The walls started to shake and collapse. After a thrilling escape and avoiding all kinds of dangers, we finally got out of the cave. Once we were out of the cave, we saw the sunlight and the fresh air that we hadn't seen for a long time. We felt so comfortable. We were already far away from the Althalia ice peak. Moreover, we were on the surface of the Tamil Plateau. The cold wind reminded us that everything in the Althalia ice peak was over. The ancient corpse emperor didn't exist anymore. At this moment, the Althalia ice mountain collapsed behind us. I didn't know if the two-headed wolf of the snow domain, the mithril giant, the shadow queen, and the stitched monster Clement had all died or escaped. I also didn't know why they were imprisoned here and who imprisoned them. Perhaps it was God. All living things were just God's chess pieces. The rest of the story might be a little sad. When we returned, we saw that the 3 fortresses and the underground city of the Dwarven Kingdom were in ruins. Flames were everywhere, just like what Queen Olivia saw in the Mirror of Prophecy. So far, everything that we saw in the Mirror of Prophecy had come true, except for Fred. When we returned to the Dwarven Kingdom, Queen Olivia saw that the Dwarven King, Gino Wildhammer, had died from serious injuries. A king's funeral was held after the battle to remember the heroes who had died for the Dwarven Kingdom. Fred returned to the Warsong Fortress to be with his brother. His brother wanted to seize the opportunity to seize the throne of the Dwarven King. So, just like what Fred saw, he and his brother turned against each other. After this journey, Fred and Olivia had formed a deep bond, especially when the two of them faced the countless skeleton army summoned by the Skeleton King, Leal. In the end, after fighting against the Ghoul army, the Dwarven Kingdom once again fell into a civil war. The civil war lasted for almost a month. Doram Iron Diamond of the Forges firmly supported Queen Olivia and defeated Harold Warsong. However, Fred Warsong was killed by his brother during the battle. Before he died, he thought that he might have fallen in love with Queen Olivia. In the end, Harold was defeated and captured. He was sentenced to life imprisonment by Queen Olivia for treason. What awaited him was endless regret and pain. Dwarves who only cared about benefits would have no friends. Just like their unbreakable alliance with the giant cage, they turned against each other because of benefits. Now, for the sake of benefits, Harold was abandoned. In the end, it led to the ascension of the first female king in the history of the Dwarven Kingdom. She was Queen Olivia Wildhammer. During the celebration after Queen Olivia Wildhammer's coronation, Avina, Uther, and I sat by the warm fire and looked at the falling snow outside the window. It had been a long time since I went back. It was time to meet Heiside the Elder. I also decided to look for Deal. I knew what I had to do next. As the Dwarven bard sang, I fell in a deep thought. Chapter 164, July 19th, 1501, the month of the scorching sun. At this time, in the capital city of the empire, the holy city of Kelendil, a full 9 years had passed since the day the Black Dragon Deal attacked the celebration. In these 9 years, the world had undergone too many changes. Prince Kaiser, who was still a child at that time, had now become the emperor of the empire, Emperor Kaiser the Great. However, the summer celebration was still held on July 20th every year. This had been the custom of the German Empire for many years to remember the once glorious era of the Odin the Great. Today was the day before this year's summer celebration. Empress Darlena was already 41 years old, but she was still as beautiful as ever, as if the years had really not left any traces on her face. She was alone in a garden in the imperial palace, looking at the scenery in the garden and the starry sky in the north. She fell into a deep sadness. Her emotions were like a flood, suddenly attacking the line of defense in her heart. Darlena actually cried alone. Today's empire could be said to be in a precarious situation. It was like a broken drum that everyone wanted to beat. In this huge empire, Darlena did not even have a single person she could trust. Kaiser the Great had now grown into an adult, but he had become incomparably cruel. Darlena had been put under house arrest in the imperial palace by him, and Darlena had only heard of his atrocities. But there was no other way. Darlena could not control Kaiser the Great. He had the support of the chief magic advisor behind him, and those who resisted him were all dead. Alonso was also loyal to Kaiser the Great. Although he was dissatisfied with the emperor's atrocities, he could only obey. At the beginning of May, the empire had received news that Port Pullen had been captured, sealed off, and looted. These northern barbarians had unexpectedly bypassed Kelendil to the south and looted the empire's most affluent area. At that time, when the army that was sent to support saw this city, it was a scene that they would never forget for the rest of their lives. There were corpses everywhere, broken limbs, naked corpses, houses that had been burned to ashes, the stench of corpses, and the crows that were gnawing on food. It was a scene of hell on earth. The spring port that was once attached to it no longer existed. It was just a ghost town. When they found the corpse of the old Dreg who had been executed by the Blood Hawk, they could imagine how much pain he had suffered. This was the city of sorrow, hell on earth. Fortunately, not all the people here had died. There were still many Derman survivors around a hotel in the west of the city, but they were under the control of a dark-skinned young man. The Empire's powerful intelligence agency could not find out the origin of this person, but in view of the fact that he could protect the people, they still acquiesced to his actions. After all, the following reconstruction work still needed people. Since the young man could manage these people well and let them join in the reconstruction work, it was still very good. At that time, the news was brought back by a local bishop who risked his life. It was the Pope who personally came to tell Kaiser the Great about it. After the little emperor heard the news, he flew into a rage and immediately ordered the Blackstone Fort to launch a large-scale counterattack on the Kingdom of Northland. Although the Empire had not yet recognized the legitimacy of the Kingdom of Northland, they had to face the strength of the Kingdom of Northland. At that time, Marshal Alonso tried his best to persuade Kaiser the Great and also sent troops to the north to attack the Kingdom of Northland, but in the end, they returned without success. At that time, some religious fanatics announced that they wanted to eradicate all heretics. Anyone who did not believe in the seven gods was an enemy of God. They captured people in the city, especially witches who knew magic. At the same time, in addition to the rebellion that had been suppressed by Alonso, a group of nature worshippers had appeared in the city. They compared nature to God, and the followers of the believers were ordinary people who loved peace. They had also secretly formed their own armed forces. At that time, the Empire's underworld was turbulent, and many forces were eyeing the old Empire covetously. These few days, in the palace's chief magic consultant Morse's room. This room was very large and could be considered an independent palace. This was Morse's personal space. This room was actually a tower with a total of 6 floors. Morse lived on the top floor. His office was usually on the 3rd to 4th floor, and the 5th floor was his private library and alchemy research area. On the floor where he lived, there was a transparent stone orb on a standing stone pillar. At this time, Morse was alone here. He was looking at the stone orb. One had to know that this stone orb was something he had painstakingly obtained. This stone orb did not look special. It was similar to an ordinary stone orb, except that it was smoother. However, when Morse put his hand on it, the stone orb instantly turned light blue, as if a light blue flame was reflected on the transparent stone orb. It turned out that Morse could see some images through this stone orb, and these images were actually what was happening in a certain corner of the continent at this moment. The chief magic consultant Morse was wearing a large black magic robe. He injected magic into the stone orb, and the stone orb instantly turned light blue. Through the stone orb, Morse saw that at this moment, in the depths of San Antonio Cathedral, several torturers were interrogating a naked witch, and they were constantly abusing her. These religious fanatics seemed to be asking the captured witch about the whereabouts of her companions. This woman may not be a witch. She was very scared, but it seemed that she really did not know the whereabouts of the people the torturers wanted to ask about. She was so scared that she trembled. But these torturers were not soft-hearted and continued to torture this woman. Finally, 2 tall and strong masked men walked into the secret room, and then there was a heart-wrenching scream from the secret room. Morse saw all this and smiled. It was almost as he expected. This group of people from the church was really doing something to the witch council. This witch council, ordinary people did not know much, and many people did not even know of the existence of this organization. But this organization not only existed, but its history was much longer than the history of the Empire. In fact, the Witch Council was the reason why Therodon could achieve what he did. So, as the secrets of the Empire, ordinary people could not know these things. Only the top officials of the Empire could touch these things. Morse also climbed from the bottom to his current position, and only then did he touch these secrets of the Empire. For this, Morse was more like an outsider watching a show. He wanted to see what the people of the church were going to do. Chapter 165. About a month ago, this kind of thing slowly started, and then it became more and more intense under the eyes of Kaiser the Great. In fact, Kaiser the Great's attitude towards these people was that he never regarded them as human beings. His attitude towards the civilians was similar to the attitude of the Northland people towards the Derman. They were all treated as lambs to be slaughtered. With the tacit consent of Emperor Keys, the religious zealots of the church began to arrest, interrogate, and execute the unarmed foreigners, women, and other people under the charge of arresting heretics and people who knew magic and would threaten the empire. For a time, people were alarmed, but more and more people became religious zealots, and these people liked violence. At the same time, this also transferred the hatred of the bad news of Prune Harbor within the empire. Because of this, people could vent the violence in their hearts. For a time, there were people everywhere who reported, and some people even reported their own sisters. Those who revered nature and loved peace only dared to communicate in secret, hugging together to protect themselves. For a time, an activity called the witch hunt broke out within the entire empire, starting from the capital city of Kelendil. The notice board in the city was filled with the bounty lists of all kinds of wanted people. The armed forces of the church began to walk the streets, going door to door to search for people. At this time, it seemed easy to frame a woman as a witch or a witch. At the time, there was a reward for informants, and there was a guarantee that the informant would be strictly kept secret and exempted from punishment, so people could wantonly frame. Thus, in town and country, any woman who, by virtue of her beauty, was envied, or by her haughtiness, offended a suitor, was sent to her death by a letter of informant, and the informant had only to stand quietly by and watch the spectacle, and thus carry out his sinister purpose. At the same time, some people wanted to take revenge for personal grudges, and some people wanted to transfer their own crisis. So, for a time, the trend of informants flourished, and many people panicked. The witch hunt even became a tool for the members of the church to vent their desires. If they couldn't get the woman they fancied, they would be framed as witches and executed. The accused woman was hauled into the magisterium of the church, in which were suspended posts from the round ceiling, and on the floor stood a torture table, upon which were placed a screw-nail chain. The arrested woman was stripped naked and had all her body hair shaved off except for her hair. Supposedly, this was to make it easier to find moles, spots, and so on that could confirm the presence of a demon. Then, she was tied to the torture platform with iron wire, and the interrogators pricked her body with needles to look for traces of the demon. There are all kinds of torture methods used on witches. Ironically, when these sanctimonious judges interrogated witches, they often used witchcraft to treat witches with witchcraft. In advance, they prayed for the success of the punishment, poured holy water into the witches so that the demon could not bind their tongues during the torture, and attached bands to the naked witches, thinking that this way, the demon could not open the shackles. In just over a month's time, 291 witchcraft and heretics were executed in the holy city of Kelendil. Among them, 268 were women, and only 26 were men. Among these 26, 11 were convicted because they were closely related to witches. These so-called witches, to put it bluntly, were just a group of ordinary women. The reason for the foolish and cruel witch hunt was initiated by the church, and their real purpose was unknown. But the people below didn't care so much. They were happiest when they could do bad things. For example, in June, a woman was accused of being a witch. Under heavy torture, she confessed, "I have been an improper woman since I can't remember. I tortured 104 children to death, including 3 of my own. They were later dug up from their graves. Some of them were cooked and eaten. Some of them were made into ointments and other potions for witchcraft. Their leg bones were made into flutes. I tortured my wife and 2 children. I tortured my 2 husbands for many years, and finally they died." Finally, the witch was hung naked by the church's fully armed knights and stabbed to death in front of the public with a spear. Surrounding her was a crowd of civilians who were watching the show. They were completely numb. Perhaps they would only feel something if it was their family who was killed. There was also a widow named Margarita, who was accused of being a witch because of the misgivings about her property. At first, she did not admit that she was a witch and had committed the crime of rebelling against God. But under the escalating torture, she had no choice but to make the following confession. 1. One night, 10 years ago, a black-faced man appeared in her garden. This man flirted with her, and she satisfied his wishes. He was a cold-hearted man. 2. He persuaded her not to believe in the 7 gods, which she did, but she immediately felt guilty. 3. This man said that his name was Black Brown, and he gave her a witchcraft broom and some ointment for witchcraft. 4. She had flown in her garden at night for some time. 5. She had used the broom to fly to George's house, to Katerina's, and to Anna's. 6. Many other women, unknown to her, had come to her house, and they had eaten and drunk together. Forced to confess, she had been tied to a post by the church's Templars and burned alive in the square. There were too many innocent women like Margarita who were killed in the fire. The execution of naked women was an opportunity for many men to enjoy, to play with, and to humiliate them. They could do whatever they wanted with the poor women and thus satisfy their bestial desires. Even in the records of the witch executions, there were words such as the woman was beautiful and plump. In more remote places, there's also a practice of throwing women into rivers to identify witches or witches. First, the accused woman was dragged onto a bridge and stripped naked in front of a crowd. Then the church made her bend her knees and tied her hands and feet together for the public to see. Then a rose-colored basket was placed on the water. The woman was placed on her back, and the ropes were loosened until the poor woman was drowned. In those days, the execution of witches was like a circus performance and was often attended by thousands of people. Some of the men were even more enthusiastic, for the naked bodies and painful contortions of the witches gave them a deformed sensuality. In the square where the execution was to be carried out, or by the bridge where the river was to be thrown, there were stalls and peddlers. It was almost like a bazaar. The witches locked in the dark and gloomy prison could not use witchcraft to escape, nor could they use magic to predict how they would be executed. Witches who were arrested were usually burned, hanged, or beheaded. The men used every means to exert their bestial desires on the women. As for whether these women were guilty or not, they didn't care at all. It seemed that this year's summer festival would be bloodier than any of the others. Chapter 166. Tomorrow is the summer celebration. There have been more and more riots recently. I feel like we won't be able to suppress them any longer. Marshal, a high-ranking officer from the William family, said to Alonso. You may leave first. Alonso had been frowning recently. During this period of time, there had been too many things that were troubling him. There were too many problems in the empire. The high price of housing made it impossible for the poor to even have a roof over their heads. The successive wars and disasters were undoubtedly another heavy blow to the aging imperium. A large number of refugees were displaced and homeless, but the nobles were rich and extravagant. Natural disasters and man-made disasters had almost depleted the empire's food supply. However, the upper echelons of the empire were even more extravagant and wasteful. They did not care about the lives of the commoners. In Kellendil, the price of food had become almost all the expenses of the commoners. Even so, they could not afford to eat meat. It was good enough that they could eat bread. Most importantly, it was just enough to maintain a state of mild hunger. The most frightening thing was that more and more refugees were pouring into the city. Not only did they bring chaos, but they also brought diseases and plagues. In the past month or so, the church had also changed their style. They began to brazenly arrest people on the streets and execute people at will. This was also tacitly approved by Emperor Keith. Alonso couldn't do anything about it, even if he wanted to. After all, the people of the church didn't directly touch the interests of the empire. They had very high authority. Even when Prince Keith was crowned as the Emperor of the Empire, it was Pope Exai who personally crowned him in San Antonio Cathedral. As for the empire's chief magic advisor, he was still as secretive as before. However, they still had to be on guard. Who knew what he was up to? People didn't want to work anymore. They became like Emperor Keys. They only wanted to drink and drink today. They were greedy for pleasure and didn't want to make progress. Only things like riots, smashing, and looting could arouse their interest. They wanted to reap without sowing. Alonso was really tired. He felt an unprecedented pressure and exhaustion. In the north, the newly established Kingdom of Northland was also eyeing the empire covetously. Reclaiming the north by force was just a pipe dream. The empire no longer had the strength to do so. In the Holy City, the secret organizations formed by the people at the bottom of the society also rose up without restraint. They couldn't be caught or killed off completely. Instead, they became more and more violent. Tomorrow was the annual summer celebration. If Thodin the Great was still alive, what would he do if he saw this? How would he feel when he saw the once incomparably glorious empire become like this? There was no doubt about Alonso's loyalty. Originally, he was just an unknown lord on the political stage of the empire. Now, he was almost in charge of the military power of the empire. It was just that this burden might be a little too heavy. In fact, what Alonso didn't know was that at this moment, he was still up and worried about the country and its people. But what were the upper-class nobles doing? If he had the stone ball like Morse, he would see some of the nobles gathered together to eat moon candy and have fun with a group of beautiful naked female slaves. Lastly, there were 4 nobles who were having sex with a female slave. One must know that the female slave was actually just an ordinary civilian who was arrested after being accused of being a witch by the church. She was then bought by the nobles to have fun. One must know that she was only 14 years old. Looking at the naked female slaves who ate moon candy and were extremely happy, one couldn't help but wonder how their parents would feel. On this ordinary yet extraordinary night, what was Emperor Kaiser doing? Our emperor, Keys, was currently playing with a group of maids in the main hall of his residence. However, they seemed to be covered in sweat. It was a dazzling sight. Do you think this is the end? Our emperor especially liked to have these scenes recorded with a magic crystal ball and had those court painters paint on the spot. In short, on the eve of the summer celebration, our emperor was having a lot of fun. Alonso was alone in the military tent. He had already done his best to arrange all the available forces to ensure the safety of tomorrow. Although he was still a little worried, he had already done his best. There was nothing else he could do. He drank alone. At this moment, he didn't even have someone to talk to. He even wondered why he was doing this. He didn't sleep for the whole night. He was drunk even though he wasn't drunk. Until the east was white, a new day had arrived. As usual, Alonso washed up and changed into a full set of armor. This set of armor had accompanied him on many expeditions for many years. Now, it was also full of scars and was not shiny and beautiful. It seemed that today was a cloudy day. The sky was covered by dark clouds. This kind of situation was rare. For so many years, the summer celebration was usually held in sunny weather. Alonso called for a meeting with his subordinate officers and once again deployed the security and other work in detail. After the meeting, Alonso personally led his men to patrol the city. What was different this year was that almost no one had traveled thousands of miles to attend the summer celebration. There were only German citizens from all over the country, and many of them were actually refugees. The city's defense couldn't be relaxed for even a moment. These refugees affected the city's appearance and brought chaos and plagues. Many of them were chased out of the city by the city's defense forces. That place was heavily guarded by Alonso's William family, as well as the imperial city's defense forces. Everything was arranged properly. In the morning, the Imperial Guard would be inspected in front of the newly built Hall of Heroes. Ever since the Hall of Heroes was destroyed by Black Dragon Ordeal, Alonso had led his men to rebuild it. In recent years, Kaiser the Great had ordered a large number of construction projects to be carried out, spending huge amounts of money to make the Hall of Heroes even more magnificent and magnificent. However, this also increased the burden on the populace, but Kaiser the Great chose to turn a blind eye to it. In contrast to the Hall of Heroes, the Imperial Guards weren't as good as they used to be. Whether it was the selection of soldiers, the internal management, or the daily training, all the real elites had been used up during the Black Dragon's attack. This year, the square in front of the Hall of Heroes wasn't crowded. The few citizens who were there had helpless expressions on their faces. Under the protection of Kaiser the Great's men, Darlena also showed up in front of the Hall of Heroes. Before Kaiser the Great could say anything, it started to drizzle from the cloudy sky. In front of the Hall of Heroes, the populace was silent. The atmosphere was extremely awkward. Chapter 167. Kaiser the Great turned his sharp eyes to Morse, the chief magic consultant of the empire. At the same time, a maid beside him immediately went to hold up an exquisite umbrella made of animal skin for Kaiser the Great. However, the people didn't have umbrellas. They could only stand there and take in a rain. Behind them were the Imperial City Defense Army and Alonso's army. Of course, the church had also sent knights to participate in the summer celebration. Morse began to release magic in front of everyone. He tried his best, but he couldn't disperse the dark clouds. He had no choice but to release a magic barrier to protect the dignitaries and the square from the rain. Kaiser the Great took out the script that the ministers had prepared for him. He was going to say a congratulatory speech to the people, just like his father. Beloved my people, thank you to the 7 gods for giving us peace and tranquility. Thank you to the 7 gods for giving us food and wine. In the next 7 days, let us hold hands and eat together, drink and chat together. Kaiser the Great didn't know that the hold hands that he had read out of desperation was actually just hold hands. Sparse applause could be heard from a square. However, when the soldiers approached, everyone present clapped with all their might, even though they were already drenched. They wished their hands would break from the applause. Next, it was the inspection of the Imperial City Defense Army. It was a team of less than 1,000 people. They held Kaiser the Great's flag with a black lion on a red background and slowly walked through the square in front of the Hero Palace. Walking at the front was the cavalry of the Imperial Guards. They wore black Imperial armor and winged helmets on their heads. They held the flag of Emperor keys in their hands as they walked to the front. The horses were uneven. Some were old, and some were young. The whole cavalry formation looked a little loose. The only thing that was a little shocking was the heads of the rebels that were hung on the horses as trophies. Those were real heads, which shocked everyone who saw them. Darlena's heart stirred when she saw that, but she didn't show it. After all, she had people sent by Kaiser the Great to look after her. The cavalry moved very slowly, and the infantrymen who entered the square after them were a little impatient. Finally, it was their turn to go on stage. These royal guards were armed with long halberds and were also dressed in black armor. They were quite tall, and some of them even had big bellies. The royal guards' footmen walked through the plaza in a rather orderly manner. At this time, the rain was getting heavier and heavier, so it was better for them to walk first. When it was the turn of the archers, they were all drenched. Their armor was not as thick as the armor of the infantrymen. Fortunately, there was no rain when they walked through the magic barrier of the square, but many of them sneezed. The commoners couldn't take it anymore because the rain was getting heavier and heavier. They had been drenched by the rain, and they didn't have any protection. They didn't dare to move because the Empire's soldiers were right behind them. Finally, the boring military parade ended in the heavy rain. The people were silent as they dispersed and returned to their homes. After closing the door, the Empire's soldiers couldn't possibly follow them home. These days were really suffocating. It would be better to become a mute so that they could control their mouths and know what to say and what not to say. All right, let's not talk about it anymore. That night, in the magnificent Hall of Heroes, Kaiser the Great hosted a banquet to entertain the lords and nobles from all over the country, as well as those who had made outstanding contributions to the empire. Alonso learned from his father that his brother Joe's whereabouts were still unknown. It was very likely that he was still in the Kingdom of Northland, but it was also possible that he was dead. Speaking of this, it was the most painful thing for his father during this period of time. It was even more troublesome for him than the loss in the confrontation with the North. However, it wasn't until tonight's banquet that Alonso finally showed a slightly relaxed expression because today seemed to be a peaceful day. Morse told Kaiser the Great that he was not feeling well, so he didn't attend the banquet and returned to his residence. Naturally, it was inconvenient for the Pope to participate in this kind of thing, so he only sent some bishops, including the bishop who had escaped from Primordium Port. Of course, the people who attended the banquet were also some commanders of the knights. None of the people from the Magic Sanctuary came this year, which made Kaiser the Great very unhappy. But after all, they were not in Kellendil, and it was beyond his reach. Next, the singing and dancing performances took turns, but there were no more exotic performances. There were only some women with good figures performing some unskilled dances. My lords, these are the untouchables. These are the sinful witches, and those are slaves. If you like them, You can enjoy them to your heart's content. They're like the food and wine on this table. You can do whatever you want with them. This time, Kaiser the Great spoke very smoothly. Empress Darlina had long been taken back by Kaiser the Great's people to take good care of her. Kaiser the Great held a woman with a big naked butt in each hand, and he bit her but hard. A trace of blood and a scream echoed in the hall. He opened his bleeding mouth and laughed loudly. Play however you want. Heroes of the Empire, enjoy yourselves to your heart's content. In an instant, these high-ranking officials and dignitaries, who usually put on airs, took off their hypocritical masks and began to enjoy the food, wine, and beautiful women to their heart's content. All kinds of voices echoed in the Hero Palace, which was unbearable to the ears. Alonso was not interested in any of this. He left the Hero Palace. After all, he was not Kaiser the Great's personal bodyguard, so there was no need for him to stay by Kaiser the Great's side all the time. He had a lot of people around him who could protect Kaiser the Great. Another day passed without any mishap. Alonso looked at the starry sky in the distance and sighed to himself. Looking at the current situation in Kellendil, it was no longer worthy of being called a holy city. It was simply a mess. The huge gap between the rich and the poor made the people at the bottom of the city live a life worse than pigs and dogs. Even Alonso could feel the invisible resentment of the people. The heavy rain during the day had stopped. Seeing that there was nothing else to do that day, Alonso decided to go back to the barracks and take a rest. Who would have thought that suddenly the sky began to rain again? In the dark night, the heavy rain made the streets muddy. At the same time, in some dark corners of the city, some masked men and women gathered together to plot something. They were not afraid of the heavy rain at all. Seeing the heavy rain, Alonso decided to go back to the Hero Palace to take shelter. There was no need to go back to the barracks in the rain. However, when he turned around and was about to go back to the Hero Palace, he seemed to see something moving in the dark grass. Chapter 168. Alonso noticed this, and his heart skipped a beat. He knew that something was about to happen. He remained calm and collected. He knew that he couldn't alert the enemy at this time. If he alerted this small group of enemies hiding in the dark, it was very likely that more of them would be released. He wanted to lure the snake out of its hole and catch all of these scum in one fell swoop. In fact, how would a person in power like Alonso know that although there were people with bad intentions, not everyone was like Alonso, a vested interest in this decaying empire? There were people who were being oppressed, so of course they would walk the path of rebellion. Not to mention why they didn't work hard and focus on development and wanted to gain something without risking anything. It was fine when the fruits of your hard work were not taken away by others. When you realized that no matter how hard you worked for tens of thousands of years, you couldn't compare to the huge amount of wealth that the vested interests already had. Furthermore, they even closed off the channels that allowed them to gain wealth in the past. It was as if you thought that earning money was written in the law, but the huge amount of wealth that the upper echelons earned was obtained that way, but they didn't allow you to do so when they were in power. This wasn't a matter of fairness. It was a matter of hope being taken away. No matter how hard you worked, it was useless. With the channels for advancement gone, the nobles didn't need to work hard because there would be people protecting them. They could do whatever they wanted, eat, drink, and enjoy themselves. They didn't need to do anything. Even if you worked until you died of exhaustion, you would still be a lackey. Furthermore, the gap between the rich and the poor was getting bigger and bigger. The richer you were, and the poorer you were, the poorer you were. At this time, the people at the bottom would think of the simplest and most violent method, which was to rob. Kill the boss and become a boss. This was the mentality of the people at the bottom. It couldn't be said that this mentality was right. It could only be said that this was a state that would occur in an empire that was struggling at death's door. When the empire was about to collapse, all kinds of conflicts would intensify. There would be internal and external troubles, and the people would have no way of making a living. At this time, people like Alonso played a role in this historical period. You could say that he was the guardian of peace, or the foolish loyalist of the empire. He could even be said to be the protector of the decadent corporations and the stumbling block of the people at the bottom. Actually, it wasn't a big problem. It was just a problem of how to distribute the limited resources. If a small number of people monopolized the majority of the resources, it would lead to this kind of riot. This was the inevitable result. As the saying goes, where there is oppression, there will be resistance. But on second thought, from Alonso's point of view, he was just doing his duty and doing his job well. It was not up to him to decide whether the emperor was good or bad. The current situation was just fate. Everyone was just doing their best to play their role well. Just like Kaiser the Great, he was just doing his best to be a qualified, licentious, and incapable ruler. As expected, the people hiding in the dark saw Alonso, but didn't see them. They decided to clean up the nobles, ministers, businessmen, and tycoons who were partying in the Hero Palace later, when a heavy rain affected their vision and hearing. As soon as Alonso entered the Hero Palace, they didn't inform the nobles, ministers, businessmen, and tycoons. He was worried that there might be spies of the enemy among them. He didn't even know who the enemy was. It was possible that the enemy was hiding among them. He just led his personal guards to Kaiser the Great, who was eating heartily. "Dear Mr. Alonso, you've worked hard today. Sit down and eat with us. You've been so nervous all day. What's the matter?" Seeing Alonso come to his side, Kaiser the Great happily invited this pillar of the empire to eat and drink with him. He knew that he could still sit there and eat heartily because of this marshal. Kaiser the Great was a cruel and self-indulgent emperor, but he wasn't a fool. He had grown up under Alonso's protection, and he knew how important Alonso was. Although he felt that Alonso was very boring, he had always been courteous and respectful to Alonso. It could even be said that he treated Alonso as half a father. He had put his mother under house arrest. Because of his mother, he could do a lot of things. Alonso nodded slightly. He didn't look surprised, but Kaiser the Great knew Alonso well. Kaiser the Great immediately realized how serious the situation was. At Alonso's signal, Kaiser the Great immediately told the people around him that his stomach wasn't feeling well. Accompanied by Alonso, he went to the bathroom. As soon as they left the banquet hall of the Hero Palace, Alonso and the others immediately escorted Kaiser the Great to his own palace. Alonso's William family troops and imperial guards were secretly dispatched. Some of them were sent to protect Kaiser the Great, while the others were led by Alonso to set up an ambush and wait for the big fish to take the bait. "Brothers and sisters, it's time to assassinate that despicable bathing king," an assassin in the dark said to the others. The bathing king referred to Kaiser the Great. Kaiser the Great was called Bathing King because Kaiser the Great had a hobby of taking baths. In the big marble bathtub, he would be served by beautiful maids with beautiful figures. There would be wine and food, music and dancing, as well as paintings by artists. A bunch of people would party in front of him. Kaiser the Great really knew how to enjoy himself. He played with everything he could. Of course, apart from the real dignitaries of the empire, the only people who could really bathe with him were some special beauties, such as princesses of other countries or female magicians from the magic sanctuary. Of course, people had to be honest with each other when bathing, and women were no exception. Kaiser the Great really knew how to have fun. At the order, these people rushed out of the dark places. In the rain, they set off in the direction of the brightly lit and magnificent Hero Palace from all directions. They gradually gathered into a black torrent and poured into the Hero Palace, which was currently partying. A few guards who had drunk some wine were quickly taken care of by the assassins. These people covered their faces and rushed into the banquet hall of the Hero Palace, where the dignitaries were chatting. They were immersed in a sea of delicious food, wine, and beautiful women. Armed and soaked, mob assassins rushed into the warm and brightly lit hall. They really didn't fit in with the environment. At the moment, there were still cheerful voices in the hall. Obviously, these assassins weren't taken seriously. "Kill. Don't leave a single one alive." The leader's voice broke the joyous atmosphere and added a colorful touch to this extraordinary summer celebration. Chapter 169. For a moment, a bloody battle was taking place in the splendid banquet hall of the Hero Palace. No one was innocent. It was a sea of blood and iron. The vulnerable nobles, the unarmed servants, and the fallen guards were all killed in no time. Only corpses were left on the ground. Of course, some of the nobles present had left long ago, just like Kaiser the Great. Some of them were actually the instigators of the riot. After taking care of these people, the assassins didn't expect that the stupid Kaiser the Great wasn't here. Then, Alonso suddenly led a large number of soldiers to surround the place. All the assassins couldn't escape. Alonso decided to kill them all. After the desperate battle, many people fell into a pool of blood. However, there were too many soldiers of the Empire, and they were better equipped than the assassins. The soldiers slowly approached. In the end, the assassins had no choice but to surrender. Soon, those who had taken part in the riot were arrested and locked up in the Empire's prisons. Alonso was fully armed and covered in the blood of his enemies. He came to Kaiser the Great with his men. Under the protection of a large number of soldiers, Kaiser the Great was taking a milk rose bath in a huge bathtub and playing with several maids. "Your Majesty, it's taken care of. What should we do with these people?" Alonso came to report. "It's taken care of so quickly." As expected of Marshal Alonso, "I haven't been to the Colosseum for a long time. Why don't we send these people there? Of course, you'd better find out who ordered them before you send them there. Since you're here, why don't you stay and take a bath, Marshal Alonso?" Kaiser the Great said with a smile. Alonso said he had something to do and had to go. Kaiser didn't ask him to stay, but secretly cursed him for being a block of wood. When it came to pleasure-seeking, no one was more fanatical than Kaiser the Great of the German Empire. From the moment he came to power, he began to build the Colosseum. The Colosseum in Kellendal was built with the help of tens of thousands of captives. The spectator stands inside the animal fighting Colosseum were divided into 4 groups from the lowest to the highest. The seats of the spectators were divided according to the difference in rank and status. After the construction of the Kellendal Colosseum, the Empire's favorite pastime was to watch the bloody fights from the sidelines. A large number of gladiators were driven into the Colosseum to kill each other or fight with wild beasts. The bloodthirsty, noble slave masters obtained a barbaric pleasure from the blood and sacrifice of the gladiators. A few days later, in the Kellendal Colosseum, "Sir, the people and beasts in each cage have similar combat power. I guarantee that the audience will be satisfied." The person in charge of the inspection reported to his superior after inspecting the place. That's right. Tomorrow, His Majesty Kaiser will personally come to watch the battle. He will definitely ensure that nothing goes wrong here. Have those assassins been given special treatment? The person who looked like an officer said with a sinister smile. "Yes, we have taken care of them as instructed," the man reported. "That's not bad." There were huge metal cages in the Colosseum. Some of the people in the cages were wearing equipment and even holding weapons. However, some people had nothing. They only wore ordinary clothes and were barehanded. However, there were differences in their combat power against the insect beasts. The strong against the strong, the weak against the weak. These people really knew how to arrange things. The combat power of the humans and the insect beasts were similar. If one wanted to determine the winner, one could only rely on rich experience and a life and death battle. The bloody spectacle was indeed to the liking of many people. The most important thing was that one could bet on it. A life and death battle with similar combat power could not be faked. It was almost impossible to determine who would win and who would lose. Life and death could be decided in an instant. It was no wonder that many people from the Empire would come here to gamble. The degree of thrill and excitement was no less than the fights in the arena. The next day, as expected, Kaiser the Great brought people and Alonso to watch the life and death battle of the captured assassins. They sat in the most luxurious spectator seats with a canopy. At this time, the Colosseum was filled with people. At this time, there was a beast fight going on below. It was considered an appetizer. At this time, there was a huge black ant fighting a middle-aged man below the arena. Alonso knew at a glance that this person was about to lose. The blood on this person's thigh had already dyed the ground red. His movements were no longer as nimble as before. He seemed to be a little sluggish as he moved around. This person's combat power was slightly higher than the huge black ant. He fought the huge black ant with his bare hands. Although he left many wounds on the huge black ant, the insect beast's tolerance for pain was much higher than that of humans. The scarlet blood aroused the huge black ant's ferocious nature. Go, go, go. What are you dodging for? You can win if you keep dodging. I'm betting all my money on you. You stupid pig. Use your hands to grab its antennae. A fatty outside the arena waved the ticket in his hand and roared at the injured middle-aged man in the Colosseum. Beside him, a person who was slightly shorter than him was full of excitement. Quick, good job. Bite him to death. Bite him to death. Ah, yes, just like that. The shorter person laughed excitedly when he saw the huge black ant suddenly jump out and use its long black antennae to slap the man's face. Bad luck, really Asterisk King bad luck. When the fatty saw the middle-aged man being sent flying and crashing into the iron cage, causing the entire cage to shake, he couldn't help but curse. You stupid pig of Northland, don't come here if you don't have the ability, you damned bastard. He saw the huge black ant instantly get up and bite the neck of the man who was rolling on the ground. He couldn't help but spit a mouthful of thick phlegm on the ground. You made me lose so much money. You deserve to die without a complete corpse. Haha, good death. Wonderful death. Huge black ant, I love you to death. The shorter person laughed maniacally when he saw that the outcome of the battle had been decided. At the same time, many people around them started to curse and laugh crazily. However, the man under the huge black ant died with his eyes wide open, not long after Alonso saw the next battle. Some people killed the wild boar, while others were killed by others. Life and death, sorrow and joy, it was vividly portrayed here. Alonso also noticed that those who walked out of the Colosseum alive were more or less injured. After all, their strength was similar. It was almost impossible to kill an opponent without paying a price. What awaited them was not freedom, but only the next battle of life and death. Endless battles, meaningless deaths. When would it end? The corpses on the ground had all been dragged out. However, the ground was covered in blood and had not been cleaned. The thick smell of blood still spread throughout the Colosseum. At this moment, a good show seemed to be about to begin. The highlight of the day was about to appear. Chapter 170. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Today, we are honored to be here with our beloved His Majesty Kaiser to watch the next performance. Today's performance will be very exciting. Without further ado, let's welcome our special gladiators today. A knowledgeable man in a luxurious robe spoke into a microphone equipped with a megaphone. Next, there was a commotion among the crowd who came to watch the gladiatorial performance. They were all the upper and middle-class people in the German Empire. After all, it was impossible for people at the bottom to have the money to watch such an expensive gladiatorial performance. That was because the entrance ticket for the gladiatorial show alone cost more than 10 silver coins. How could ordinary people afford such expensive tickets? Kaiser the Great, who was sitting in the most distinguished seat, was very satisfied with all this at this moment. In the arena, 2 teams of gladiators were released from the iron cages on both sides. It seemed that today's performance was going to be a group battle. These gladiators in the arena now have a somewhat special identity. These people might be free people like you and me a week ago, but now they're traitors of the Empire. They even tried to assassinate our great His Majesty Kaiser. Today, His Majesty Kaiser magnanimously forgave them for their sins. Let them prove themselves here with courage and strength and regain their glory. At this time, the host's words came from the microphone again. These assassins were divided into 2 teams with their respective weapons, ready to fight. Alonso immediately noticed that there was a little girl who was holding a standard spear in the 2 groups of gladiators among the dozens of assassins. Under the host's order, the 2 sides began to fight to the death. Alonso knew that except for the leading assassin who was being interrogated at this time, these assassins really didn't know that there was a little girl in the team. One of the assassins actually said in public that they should stop fighting each other and fight against the Empire's soldiers together. They should unite and fight their way out of the arena. At this time, the audience in the arena had already begun to bet on which team would win. Many people were not optimistic about the team with the little girl, and they all bet on the other team to win. At this moment, the assassin who had called for an end to the killing was actually struck by the other party's axe. For a moment, an internal battle between them had begun. In the end, the little girl and the remaining 4 assassins faced off against 8 enemy assassins. Many people believed that the little girl would be the first to die. However, the truth was that they were wrong. However, they still felt that it was 8 against 4. In a situation where the difference in strength was not much, of course, the side with more people would win. However, they were wrong once again. After a series of battles, only 3 assassins remained, while the other side only had 1 assassin left. The little girl killed 4 assassins and gladiators in an instant with her long spear. The opponent immediately collapsed and lost the courage to resist. The little girl walked up to them and pierced their stomachs with her long spear. Their blood flowed all over the ground. At this moment, the audience was in an uproar. How is this possible? Kaiser the Great smiled. Now, this is interesting. Then, the host smirked and said that only 1 person in their team could survive. When the other 3 assassins heard this, they actually chose to commit suicide with tears in their eyes. This was because they had seen the little girl's performance, and they hoped that she could live for them. For a moment, the 3 of them drew their swords and committed suicide. How is this possible? Alonso would never have thought that with so many people fighting, the only survivor would be an 11 or 12-year-old child. Moreover, it was a little girl. The little girl was of medium height. Her hair was a little messy and coarse. Her clothes were simple and could even be said to be a little shabby. The wide gray linen cloth hung on her body, and there were many small holes on it. Her lower body was only wearing a pair of shorts that just reached her knees. Her exposed arms and calves looked a little thin and weak. However, in the little girl's hand, she was holding a long spear that was almost twice her size. It looked a little funny and very out of place. Although this long spear looked incomparably sharp, it was actually the most ordinary standard long spear. The little girl's steps were very small and slow. Holding the long spear, she walked slowly to the center of the Colosseum. She stood there quietly and did not say a word. She did not care about the shouts and shouts around her. In her eyes, there was a maturity that did not match her age. However, under the signal of the officer, the host said that there would be an important show next. This survivor would fight against the giant black centipede. If she won, she would be acquitted. At the same time, a new bet had already begun. Everyone could place their bets. Many people were deeply impressed by the little girl's performance, so they bet that the little girl would win. However, there were also people who felt that the little girl was an arrow at the end of its flight, so they bet that the black centipede would win. At this moment, a black centipede about 3 meters long was let in from another opening in the Colosseum. The black centipede's body was covered with small scales that were incomparably hard. As soon as it revealed itself, it raised its body and waved its 2 long antennae at the little girl. It let out a low hiss from its mouth. The pair of poisonous hooks under its mouth were shining brightly, emitting a dark light. The little girl did not retreat, nor did she show a trace of timidity. She only tilted her long spear and pointed it at the centipede's scarlet eyes. Suddenly, the black centipede moved. Its speed was very fast. Its entire body seemed to be flying as it headed for the little girl's face. However, the little girl did not retreat half a step. The expression on her face did not change. She was cold and indifferent. She only tilted her long spear slightly and aimed it at one of the centipede's eyes. If the centipede continued to move forward, the tip of the long spear would definitely pierce its eyes. As expected, the centipede's body suddenly swayed and changed its direction. In an instant, it swept past the edge of the long spear and fell to the side of the little girl. Oh, Alonso's eyes lit up. He did not expect that the little girl would simply tilt her long spear and resolve the centipede's first attack so easily. What sharp insight! Alonso exclaimed in his heart. If what happened just now was not a coincidence, then the little girl's insight was absolutely unimaginable. She could instantly determine where the black centipede would land and react in time. Moreover, she was extremely confident in this judgment. She dared to guarantee that her long spear was pointing at the black centipede's eyes. The black centipede was obviously unwilling to give up on its prey just like that. It roared again, and its long antennae swayed. It twisted its body and jumped toward the little girl's knee again. The little girl did not dodge. She only took a horse stance and half-squatted. The long spear in her hand was aimed at the centipede's eyes again. Her action seemed simple, but she directly targeted the centipede's greatest weakness, its eyes. The first time could be said to be a coincidence. The second time was the same. Alonso was sure that this little girl definitely had extraordinary insight. Chapter 171. What's even more commendable is that this little girl, who is only in her teens at most, has such a temperament. She doesn't know what fear is when facing such a terrifying centipede. It's really rare. Seeing the centipede land again, the little girl suddenly moved. She was no longer passively defending. Instead, she stabbed the spear in her hand towards the centipede's right eye. There were no fancy moves, no unnecessary movements. She just thrust it forward, straight towards the scarlet right eye. Unfortunately, her speed was not enough. If I want to stab this eye, I'll probably be a little short. Alonso instantly judged in his heart. Alonso had just seen the centipede's speed. It was very fast, definitely faster than the little girl's spear. That's not right. Alonso suddenly opened his eyes, somewhat moved. With a crisp sound, blood splattered. The centipede's scarlet right eye was instantly pierced through by the sharp edge of the spear, dyeing the spear red. It actually really stabbed. Alonso's face was filled with disbelief. As soon as the little girl made her move, Alonso judged the speed of the spear. He knew that if he stabbed the spear at this speed, he would definitely not be able to touch the centipede. But the little girl's spear did it. Although the little girl was stabbing straight ahead, it wasn't the same. Her spear was always looking for the shortest distance between it and the centipede's eye. She could always adjust the direction of the spear at the right time, although this adjustment was always at an extremely small angle. If the speed was not enough, then she would shorten the distance. What frightening insight! Alonso believed that even if he had practiced martial arts for many years, he would not be able to have such an absolute grasp of space and time. This was almost an innate talent, an instinct. Genius! Alonso looked at the little girl with sparkling eyes. Alonso used to wave his sword under his father's guidance, paying attention to speed, accuracy, and strength. Every time he swung his sword, he would always follow the direction of the sword and move forward. Even if he changed the sword momentum, he would make a judgment based on the opponent's counterattack. However, he had never thought of seizing the initiative from this distance. Moreover, a straight line was the shortest distance between 2 points. However, if one wanted to swing a sword in a straight line, one had to constantly adjust the angle of the sword. This little girl's simple strike gave Alonso too many emotions. He even recalled the time when he was young and trained in martial arts. The little girl then used all her strength to lift the spear and flung the centipede's body away from the tip of the spear, causing blood to spurt out. The intense pain caused the centipede to twist its body crazily. It almost curled up into a ball and let out a crazy roar. "All right, good job. Little brat, hurry up and kill this monster so that I can earn some money to buy some wine." At the same time, the spectators outside the arena all let out excited laughter. Almost all of them had bet on the little girl to win. This little girl's attack just now gave them great confidence. The black centipede had lost an eye, so it didn't jump at the little girl anymore. Instead, it crawled on the ground and rushed toward the little girl's feet. More than 100 pairs of feet rustled on the ground. The little girl's eyes were wide open. All of her attention was focused on the huge centipede on the ground. The little girl didn't retreat. The spear in her hand was tilted, almost touching the ground. However, this time, the black centipede didn't forcefully pounce on her. Instead, when it was about to crawl in front of the little girl, its 3-meter-long body suddenly swung its tail and swept toward the little girl's feet. The centipede's strength was very great. It even brought about the sound of the wind. Don't take it head on. Alonso had long seen that the little girl's strength wasn't great. She always held the spear in the most comfortable position. She was conserving her energy. If she were to clash with the centipede head-on, Alonso estimated that the spear in the little girl's hand would definitely be sent flying. The centipede's skin was very hard. The spear in the little girl's hand was only an ordinary weapon. It would be very difficult to cause damage to its body. Good job, as Alonso exclaimed in surprise. The little girl threw the spear at the head of the centipede that was crawling on the ground. However, because the centipede's body was turned sideways, this throw didn't directly pierce its eyes. It only threw the spear in front of the centipede. When the centipede's tail swept over, the little girl suddenly jumped. She held the spear in her hand and relied on the support of the spear to instantly leap over the centipede's huge body. However, the little girl's body didn't land on the ground. Instead, she held the spear upright. Her small body was completely attached to the top of the spear. This action is just like when I was young, holding a bamboo pole and prying in the air. Alonso looked at the little girl's dodging posture and recalled the way he played when he was young. It's not over yet. Alonso narrowed his eyes. When the black centipede swung its tail, it would definitely move its entire body. When the black centipede's body was about to move to the left due to inertia, the little girl in the air suddenly spun the spear. The spear supported on the ground instantly aimed at the centipede's left eye and cut it off on the spot. Rather than cutting, it should be the centipede's left eye that collided with the spear that was prepared for it. This little girl's strength was terrifying. Dodge, spin, harvest. All of this must have been part of the little girl's plan. Alonso looked at the little girl with a faint admiration. If she wasn't one of the assassins, Alonso would really think of her as his daughter. In just 3 short exchanges, the centipede had lost a pair of eyes. Alonso looked at the little girl who had landed on the ground with a face full of admiration. If it were anyone else, it would definitely be difficult to achieve this. Even if they could do it, they would have to pay a great price. They are evenly matched, and neither side is willing to give an inch. In the end, both sides will suffer. But this little girl with a stab and a spin, she harvested a pair of eyes. It's all because of her extraordinarily sharp insight and judgment. Alonso knew that there were geniuses in this world. Some people, from the moment they were born, had unparalleled talent and ability in a certain aspect, leaving others in the dust. For example, the little girl in front of him. Her extraordinary insight was something that others couldn't learn even if they wanted to. All of this was completely instinctive. It was simple and unadorned. When it was time to defend, it was time to defend, and when it was time to attack, it didn't hesitate. From the beginning to the end, she targeted the centipede's biggest weakness, its eyes. Moreover, the spear in her hand also played a key role. The centipede that had lost both its eyes crazily swung its body. Its 3-meter-long body was like a steel whip, sweeping randomly on the ground. The little girl didn't tangle with it. After her successful attack, she quickly left. The spear was slanted horizontally, always maintaining a distance of a spear from the centipede. Good job, little brat. Yes, drag it to death like this. Seeing that the black centipede had lost another eye, many people outside the arena shouted excitedly. The little girl's victory meant that they had won and that they had another income. Chapter 172. The centipede did not only rely on its eyes to determine its position. After the intense pain, its 2 tentacles kept sweeping and soon determined the little girl's position. Whoosh! Whoosh! More than 100 pairs of legs crawled rapidly in the direction of the little girl on the ground. A scalp-numbing sound could be heard. The little girl tapped the ground with her toes and quickly retreated. However, the spear in her hand was tilted forward and did not touch the ground. She maintained this strange posture from beginning to end. One human and one beast, one retreated and one advanced. However, the centipede's speed was much faster than the little girl's. In a moment, the two tentacles in front of the centipede's head were about to touch the spear in the little girl's hand. The little girl suddenly stomped her feet on the ground and steadied herself. The centipede heard the sound and quickly leaped forward. Its huge body pounced towards the little girl's position. However, just as it moved, the little girl turned the spear in her hand and quickly pulled it to the side. A 1-meter-long brown tentacle was cut off. This centipede could hear and feel the little girl's aura, but could not feel the aura of the metal spear. The spear did not touch the ground, and there was no sound. Therefore, the centipede could not determine the spear's position. Using this point, she lured the centipede to take the bait and take the initiative to meet the spear. This centipede's biggest weakness was its eyes. Secondly, these two tentacles were not as hard as its skin and were easily damaged. All right, little brat, take your time. There's no rush. Cut off this beast's things bit by bit. I have all the time. Seeing that the situation was developing in their favor, the people outside the arena all laughed excitedly. As long as we cut off one more tentacle, this little girl will win for sure. Alonso noticed that the centipede's speed was not as fast as before. The loss of its eyes and tentacles still had a huge impact on it. The pain was secondary. The constant loss of blood meant that its vitality and energy were also constantly flowing away. The little girl suddenly raised the spear in her hand and used the spear shaft to knock on the ground continuously. However, every time she knocked 3 times, the spear in her hand would instantly tilt and point directly at the crazily writhing black centipede on the ground. This little girl is luring the centipede to take the initiative to attack. Facing the next attack, she should have absolute confidence. The little girl knocked on the ground as she retreated. She noticed that the distance between her and the Colosseum was less than 1 meter. The little girl deliberately leaned her body heavily against the iron cage, making a muffled sound. The tip of the spear tilted and instantly aimed at the 3-meter-long black centipede. Just as the little girl collided with the cage, the black centipede moved. It leaped into the air and lashed out at the little girl like a steel whip. The little girl did not panic. She held the long spear in her hand horizontally and blocked in front of her. This little girl was always defending while attacking. What she relied on was not only her battle prowess, but also her powerful perception and judgment. Alonso suddenly narrowed his eyes, his face full of disbelief. What's going on? How could you make such a mistake at such a crucial moment? In Alonso's eyes, the spear in the little girl's hand suddenly tilted down a little. Although it was only a little, Alonso knew that it was impossible for her to cut the other tentacle of the centipede at this distance. If she couldn't cut it, then the little girl would be sent flying. The little girl's face was instantly filled with panic. She was no longer as confident as before, as if everything was under her control. This little girl obviously didn't do it on purpose. But how could such an unforeseen event happen? Alonso saw the little girl's reaction and instantly made a judgment. Could it be that her body is not strong enough and she can't hold the spear? That shouldn't be the case. Alonso shook his head and his heart. This spear is just an ordinary piece of equipment. The little girl didn't even use her strength to wield the spear. With her physique, it shouldn't be a problem for her to hold it for another half an hour. But how could she make such a mistake? One must know that once she makes such a mistake, she could lose her life at any time. Alonso couldn't figure it out. Although the little girl instantly put the spear back to its original position, it was already too late. Bang! The little girl's body was instantly sent flying by the 3-meter-long centipede. She heavily smashed into the iron cage, causing the entire cage to shake. Blood instantly flowed out from the little girl's mouth. Come, let's drink. Looks like the medicine is starting to take effect. There was a small room below the beast fighting arena. In the middle of the room, there was a wooden round table. At this moment, there were 5 or 6 people drinking around the round table, causing the small room to seem a little crowded. From the window of the room, one could see the little girl and the centipede fighting. Seeing the little girl being sent flying, the people here laughed heartily. One must know that they were the ones who put the medicine in the assassin's food. Get up quickly. Go quickly. You little brat, lie on the ground and pretend to be dead. The people outside the arena, who were full of smiles just now, saw the little girl lying on the ground for a long time and didn't get up. They instantly scolded the little girl, their smiles just now completely gone. This little girl, in their eyes, was just a money-making tool. No one really cared about her life or death. It shouldn't be. There's definitely a problem. With this little girl's body, although she would be injured after being swept by the centipede, she shouldn't be unable to get up. Alonso saw that the little girl was really trying her best to get up. However, as soon as she used her arms to support herself, she immediately fell down weakly. Alonso knew that this little girl didn't have the slightest bit of strength in her body now. There's definitely a problem, Alonso said with certainty. He could see very clearly from his position. However, the onlookers didn't care about this. They were all crazily shouting at the little girl. In their eyes, the little girl was severely injured by the centipede. She spat out a mouthful of blood and couldn't get up for the time being. Sizzle. The black centipede's attack succeeded. It let out an excited roar. Its whole body jumped and pounced towards the little girl's position again. It opened its big mouth, and a thick stench rushed towards the little girl. Hiss! At the critical moment, the little girl finally jumped with all her strength and narrowly avoided the bloody big mouth. The little girl's stubborn eyes were filled with a strong desire to live. Look, no one was willing to die in the mouth of this insect beast. However, her linen clothes weren't so lucky. They were bitten by the centipede's sharp teeth. With a sizzle, they were instantly torn to pieces. The little girl felt that she couldn't exert any strength in her body. She had a splitting headache and was dizzy. It was very difficult for her to stand there. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.